This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation with James O'Brien.
3 minutes after 10. Does that ever happen to you? You're not properly paying attention. You hear something in the headlines and your jaw hits the absolute floor. I thought he said Owen Paterson was standing trial accused of feeding his family poisonous mushrooms. But absolutely not. It is not the former Secretary of State for Northern Ireland. It's a case that is currently unfolding in Australia involving Erin Paterson. That was a moment. You've got to pay attention to these things. I didn't know that the news would contain a story that we'll be covering in rather more depth later today regarding the tons of strawberries being left to rot by one of Britain's biggest berry farmers. That's an agreeable phrase, isn't it? I can't help it. Whatever the story is, my sort of enthusiasm for words always bubbles to the surface. One of Britain's biggest berry farmers. That's a lovely phrase. You want to make sure you got your teeth in before you say it too loudly. We'll get stuck into that after PMQs, because it is, of course, Wednesday, which means PMQs will be with us on come 12 noon today. Okay, if I'm right about this, then I'm really, really wrong about something else. Let me read you a message that came in when I mentioned net zero a moment ago from Mike. He says, net zero, it's another weight around the necks of the working class while the rich all carry on as normal and just pay to offset whatever they do. Absolute scam. And the reason why I wonder whether I'm wrong and right at the same time is that I have absolutely no idea what he's talking about. I've genuinely no idea. For me, that is a comment that is up there with the lady I keep talking about who turned up for jury service claiming that Michelle Obama was a man. It seems to me to be almost word for word something that's been lifted, mentally copied and pasted, if you like, from online outrage farms. I honestly, and this is where it could mean I'm horribly wrong about everything, because I can't think of a single area of my life where I am being, what would the word be, penalised, punished, or expected to make meaningful changes. Energy bills have gone up a lot recently because Russia invaded Ukraine illegally, and the passage of gas and sundry other issues became urgent. So I'm in this weird scenario where all of the people that, frankly, you shouldn't trust to run a bath are insisting that net zero may turn out to be the next Brexit. They're almost desperate for it to happen, and yet they're the people that told us Brexit would be a good idea. That's why I mentioned Britain's biggest berry farmer. I didn't know that the headlines today at 10 o'clock. I knew we were covering it later in the show. I didn't know we were going to be hearing it in the headlines at 10, but it's pertinent, isn't it? How could anybody who encouraged you to vote for Brexit now be saying net zero is the new Brexit, vote for me on this as well, support me on net zero as well, because Brexit's gone so well? It's like those stories we used to hear about internet con men persuading you to part with your life savings so that you could help liberate $48 million from a mystery bank account in the Middle East somewhere. And then after you've handed over your life savings, and lo and behold, the $48 million hasn't appeared, they get back in touch with you a month later and say, we're nearly there, just give me a house. Give me a house. That seems to me to be the logic of claiming that the net zero debate is going to be the new Brexit. I've taken your life savings. I promised you the earth. It hasn't arrived, so just give me a house and we'll be over the line. But I can never give up on this. But I began to despair long ago at the gulf between reportage, if you like, or online and increasingly mainstream media propaganda farms and the actual observable reality. Which brings us back to Mike. Net zero, he writes, another weight around the necks of the working class while the rich carry on as normal and just pay to offset whatever they do. I have no idea what he is talking about. And neither do I ever encounter people who talk about this in real life. You've heard this phrase frequently, permanently online, and it is as if there are two universes now that we either do or do not inhabit, with a few people straddling both, inhabiting both. I probably need to do more jury service. I can't keep citing the same example of what happens when somebody truly disappears down a rabbit hole of dangerous delusion. But that is, it seems to me, what happens here. All comment sections now are ridiculous. All comment sections are the very worst of humanity. It's as if vaguely sensible people gave up bothering to contribute to online forums decades, if not, well, years ago, if not decades. Even the Times comment section, which used to be all right. The Guardian went first, bizarrely, but that was because they had the first below-the-line comment section, and immediately people sort of recognised that their meaningless existences could be temporarily imbued with a delusion of relevance by posting something on there and getting a few hundred likes or dislikes. So the comment sections are full of people like Mike who think that net zero is another weight around the necks of the working class while the rich carry on as normal. I suspect in real life, none of us really know what he's on about. Which brings us to Tony Blair, who has not this morning attacked Labour's net zero plans, regardless of what all the front pages say. He hasn't specifically focused on Labour at all. There's no specific criticism of the UK in this report, if you bother to read it, and I've done my best. But he clearly is attacking tactics currently deployed. And we're coming to a weird phone-in on this one, so stand by your phones. He's not actually attacking the targets, regardless of how it's already being spun by right-wing media. Net zero is doomed, Blair tells Starmer, is the front page of the Daily Telegraph. I'll say it again. There's no specific mention, no specific criticism of the UK, but he talks about people being asked to make financial sacrifices and changes in lifestyle when they know that the overall impact will not be enough. So he recognises the need for net zero. He recognises the necessity of targets. What he introduces to the conversation today is the idea that our tactics are wrong. The idea that the tactics largely being deployed around the world are wrong. When I was researching this story earlier today, I stumbled across a story that surprised me, and I think I missed it at the time. It emerged last year that Tony Blair had remained upon the payroll of the Saudi Arabian government after the murder of the journalist Adnan Khashoggi. So if I were to wade into the net zero debate, I think the first thing I'd do is ensure that I didn't have any links whatsoever with petrochemical economies. I heard a caller raise this point to Nick earlier, and Nick pointed out that Tony Blair is a very wealthy man and therefore surely immune to any conflict of interest. And I don't think you need to be a very wealthy man to be immune to conflicts of interest. But I agree with Nick. Guys, almost like the prime ministerial debates in 2010, isn't it? I do agree with Nick on that. I don't believe that Tony Blair is susceptible to conflicts of interest in this way. I don't think he's publishing a report about net zero because he wants to cozy up to Middle Eastern potentates that have him on the payroll for various advisory and consultancy roles. But the perception of a conflict of interest, we're back to Jimmy Carter's peanut farm. If you're going to wade into the debate about net zero, about the use, crucially, of fossil fuels, then it seems to me that you shouldn't, just for the sake of clarity and transparency, you shouldn't be on the payroll of countries whose economies depend almost entirely upon the continuing sale and use of fossil fuels. But that's probably an aside. That's probably a by-the-by. Jamal Khashoggi, sorry, I got that surname right and I got him mixed up with somebody else. Thank you, Callum. And that, of course, brings us to the tactics as opposed to the target, because what he seems to be saying is that we need to sort this out. We need to address net zero, but what we shouldn't be doing is doing it in the way that we're doing, i.e. Trying to cut down the use of actual fossil fuels. We should carry on using fossil fuels and increase technologies designed to minimise their impact. Most obviously, CCS or carbon capture solutions. And you can see some sense in that. With that very troubling side order, which I think that side order is going to possibly get bigger in the course of the conversation, that troubling side order of knowing that the Tony Blair Institute continued to take money from Saudi Arabia after the murder of Jamal Khashoggi. What is he talking about? And I don't mean that in my usual throw my hands up in the air and do a Ken Dodd impression, or isn't everything tatty hilarious? I mean, what is he talking about? Because I don't want to be where I was on the Andrew Tate stuff, for example. I think we have to grow up a bit. Just because something is happening largely online no longer means it doesn't matter. And of course, it's not largely online. It is a bit like Brexit. It starts off with a few headbangers that used to ring me in, say, the year 2000 and 2006, wanging on about sovereignty and the Fourth Reich, and the next thing you know, it's 2016, and enough of the country has been persuaded of this bills that they've actually voted to become the first population in history to impose economic sanctions on itself. So we can't ignore it. I think even Farage is describing it as the new Brexit, describing net zero as the new Brexit, which is an incredible thing to do, given that he's taken absolutely no responsibility whatsoever for the disaster that Brexit is, while he couldn't stop doing laps of honour at the time, claiming that he was the person most responsible for delivering it. So in a logical universe, we'd all just turn the page, right? It's the new Brexit. Oh, well, in that case, all the people telling me it's bad must be horribly, horribly wrong. Because all the people telling me net zero is bad were the same people that told me Brexit is good. And then Tony Blair wades into the conversation, which changes the game, right? It changes the flavour. Too often, the Institute has written, political leaders fear saying what many know to be true. The current approach isn't working, but they mustn't be silent. There's a new coalition to build, one that unites disillusioned activists with technologists and policymakers ready to act. Political leaders, by and large, know that the debate has become irrational, but they're terrified of saying so for fear of being accused of being climate deniers. As ever, when sensible people don't speak up about the way a campaign is being conducted, the campaign stays in the hands of those who end up alienating the very opinion on which consent for action depends. That's from his foreword for the report from his institute, in which he accuses world leaders of being terrified to admit that climate policies are not working. Which brings me to my questions for you this morning. Is he right? You're going to need to know a little bit more about this subject than I do to answer that question, which probably, and I don't want to be unkind, that probably disqualifies people like Mike. I don't want you just to ring in and parrot your Auntie Doris's Facebook page or your below-the-line comments on various online websites or your Facebook group that's dedicated to abolishing ULEZ cameras and net zero in the same breath, all right? I know it can be fun and I know it goes viral, but I think some things are too important to have fun bearding the bonkers. So is he just right? You know a lot about this. You are a disillusioned activist. You think he is right. The tactics are failing. 03456060973. And then the other bit, and for this I'm going to apologise in advance for sounding insulated from reality. But it seems to me quite important that you can answer this question. Really important that you can answer this question if we're going to even entertain the possibility that the entire conversation needs to change. What financial sacrifices and changes in lifestyle are we being asked to make? Or perhaps more importantly, compelled to make? I lead a relatively normal life. I've never been a petrol head, as you know. I don't have a particular problem putting the bins out in the morning. It's actually today, bin day. So there's 3 bins that I put out, one with paper and card in it, one with plastics and tins in it, and one with glass in it. And then every fortnight the main bin gets taken away, and every other week the garden rubbish. Usually spring and summer, there's not, and autumn. Well, no, I actually do quite a lot of gardening, but this is not of enormous interest to you. Every other week the garden rubbish gets taken away in the big brown bin. And I immediately recognise I live in a house. So I've got lots of room to store that stuff. And if I didn't, I've had a problem. I think that's part of the fly tipping conversation that sometimes gets overlooked. If you reduce rubbish removal and you live in a really small property, it's a much, much bigger problem than it is for people who live in a bigger property. Certainly people who've got outside storage space. But that doesn't seem to me to be a reason necessarily to review the way that we're approaching climate change, global warming and imminent environmental disaster. What are the financial sacrifices and changes in lifestyle that Tony Blair is talking about? And I don't mean this in a facetious way. I'm not suggesting he's lying or that he's wrong, but somewhere between old Mike there with his weight around the necks of the working class rhetoric and Tony Blair with his claim that we're all making financial sacrifices and changes in lifestyle must lie some truth. There must be things we are required to do that you really hate doing because of net zero. What are they? Just tell me, seriously. I don't even want to scrap about this. I just want to make a list. He's not a hero of mine, Tony Blair. He was once, and I think history will be kind to him with obviously the Iraq debacle writ large on his record. But without Iraq, his record was spectacular, actually, in the context of post-war British prime ministers. But he's not a hero of mine. I don't really have political heroes if they're still alive. All my political heroes are dead. I think that's much healthier because they're much less likely to disappoint you. But he is somebody who has proven to be on more or less the right side of history on most major issues. Again, Iraq notwithstanding, but certainly on Brexit, certainly on matters economic. When Gordon Brown became Prime Minister after Tony Blair hung up his headphones, we'd had consecutive years of economic growth that were almost unprecedented. So there's a lot going on when Tony Blair intervenes in a debate. Although I've got something funny to tell you after this break about why I wonder whether young people care about his contributions so much. But what I don't know on this occasion is what he's talking about. I think the argument has possibly been lost. I failed to get phone-ins going on net zero in the way that I would have liked to. They've been good phone-ins, don't get me wrong, but I can always tell the difference between something that's blown the blooming doors off and something that hasn't. I've never blown the blooming doors off. Permanently online people profess to care passionately, but they've rarely got a second string to their bow. You ask them why, they don't really know. But when Tony Blair wades in, you have to think there must be more to this than online warriors compute. And that's my question. What's he talking about? 0345 6060 973. And on the broader question of whether or not the debate is doomed, whether or not the battle is actually over and people on the activist side of the conversation are just too frightened to say so, I really want to know whether you just think he's right. Is he right or is he wrong? 20 past 10 is the time.
James O'Brien on LBC.
2 minutes after 10. He hasn't described net zero as a disaster. He's described the current plans to achieve it as doomed to fail. You could, of course, be forgiven for not noticing that from much of the coverage. But, of course, it opens up the question of, is he right? And also, a quick you're welcome to everybody who's just been reminded to do their recycling and put the bins out as a consequence of my earlier contribution. Let's crack on. Anna is in Oxford. Anna, what made you pick up the phone?
Hi there, James.
Hello,
First-time caller.
You're very welcome.
Thank you. I'm an environmental and energy manager, and I work for a big corporation, which I won't name.
Sure.
And I have kind of two perspectives on this, really. So I am pretty committed environmentally. I've got the solar panels, I've got the electric car, and I don't eat meat, but I do fly. Yeah. So, there's always something that you do that doesn't fit the narrative. But what I wanted to say is I think there's 2 points here. So I spend a lot of my time collecting data and analysing data for big reports. And I'm going to go through a load of names of reports that you probably won't know about. So ESOS, SECA, CSRD, TCFD. There's absolutely tons of them, okay? Yes. And there's increasing amounts of reports that become legal requirements for companies. And I feel that these reports are produced every year, and they're very glossy, and they go on the company's website. And they'll say, this is how many emissions they've produced, this is what they produce, this are their targets, etc., etc. The problem is, I feel that those reports are actually detracting from doing the really basic good stuff. So one thing I've been trying to do in my company is increase recycling rates, reduce energy use. But those aren't the priorities of the company. Because a company is judged on these glossy reports, which will cost maybe £10,000 to get written by a company like KPMG or Ernst Young or something like that. I feel that's actually detracting the company from just the really basic things that would make a difference.
Is this greenwashing? Sorry to jump in.
Well, to a certain extent, I think it can be. I think it is. I think a lot of companies, most corporations probably don't massively care about the environment, but they care about what they look like. And I don't know, you will obviously know about the Volkswagen scandal with the emissions scandal.
Of course.
Yeah. And they obviously had absolutely brilliant reports. Everything looked great.
This is a fascinating starting point because in a way you're opening up a whole new vista of opinion and interest, because Tony Blair's position seems to be built upon the idea that people have become disillusioned with the demands being placed upon them. And yet what you're describing is contingent upon the perception that people want proof that companies are actually, even if it's not completely accurate proof, they at least want companies to point to the stuff that they're doing to actually improve things in this field.
This is the thing. And Tony Blair, I mean, I've written what the BBC has said about, obviously I haven't got a subscription to the Telegraph,
Yes.
so I can't read the actual...
Well, you're denying yourself a lot of laughs there, Anna, if you
well,
don't mind me saying so. The comment pages in particular are probably the funniest thing in the English language at this point in history.
I've seen some mad things, I have to say.
But anyway.
The headlines. But yeah, so obviously the fact that he's written in the Telegraph kind of suggests that there's a certain agenda with the article. And what I would say is that, again, so Tom Swarbrick did a show last night, and he said, I don't see why I should pay $9,000 to get a heat pump.
Right.
And I suppose my point to that would be, but nobody is telling you to. There's a big $7,000 reduction scheme.
I don't know anyone with a heat pump.
Pardon?
I don't know anyone with a heat pump.
No, I do know someone with a heat pump, and they've got all the good stuff, and they've had a new house built, and everything's brilliant, and they've got a heat pump.
We looked into getting one, but we live in an old Victorian house, and there were reasons.
Yeah.
But I understand Tom's point. If anyone was forcing me to do it, I'd probably feel a bit cross. But as you point out, they're just not.
Nobody is. I haven't got a heat pump. I would actually love to have a heat pump. I would get a heat pump, but my friend who's got one says don't get one. It won't work in your house properly. So that's fair enough. No one's forced me to get an electric car. No one forced me to get solar panels. So again, I feel like the public are reading these articles and saying, people are telling me I've got to do this, but nobody is. No, like you said earlier.
So it is like Brexit. It's exactly like bloody Brexit.
Yeah.
Then. It's people are being told all the time that they're not allowed to do things, and they're having their freedoms curtailed, and they're having financial sacrifices and changing in lifestyles thrust upon them, and they're just not. People are saying, "Hey, it'd be good if you did this, but you really don't have to."
Well, exactly, and there's no so the Tory government were phasing out gas boilers by 2025. You wouldn't be able to buy a gas boiler. So obviously your gas boiler wouldn't be removed, but if it broke down, you'd have a problem. They've got rid of that legislation. There was a piece of legislation that required EPC certificates, environmental performance certificates, of buildings that were being rented out to be a minimum of a C grade. That would be a problem, for example, for a house like yours.
Yes.
So that potentially means huge amounts of buildings suddenly not able to be leased. They've got rid of that legislation, or they've pushed it back. So to me, it seems like they're constantly accommodating.
It's a very odd intervention. The intervention is getting odder. You're probably, you're definitely more qualified than me to comment on this. My friend James Ball, who is one of the writers and authors that I often find myself deeply impressed by, he has posted this morning that the carbon capture technology barely works, and that the fusion, because he's also calling for small nuclear reactors to kick in. The three solutions he's got to replace what is currently being done: carbon capture, small nuclear reactors, and more AI. Just as the renewable energy starts to become cheaper, he just simply says Starmer is right and Blair is wrong.
Right.
Is that true on those three fronts? I mean, is carbon capture, or are carbon capture and small nuclear reactors going to be able to meet the challenges that the work you do is currently trying to meet?
Carbon capture is a bit of a... I mean, I'm not an expert in that, so I'm not going to pretend to be.
Nor's Tony Blair, to be fair.
No, he's not.
Although he's probably paid people who are.
Yeah, it seems to be a bit of a cop-out to kind of go for carbon capture at first, and obviously everyone knows the issues with nuclear waste, and we haven't got to the point where we've developed fusion enough, which obviously doesn't have the waste, or not so much. I mean, I think the important thing is with everything is always to be listening to people's concerns. So when people say something like a wind farm kills birds, that's not untrue, but I still think maybe more birds would die if we don't go for renewable energy. And also the fact that solar panels can come from panels made in China that are made by the wind. I can never say the word Uyghur Muslims, is it?
Yes, of course.
Yeah, but you can also get solar panels from ethical sources. So obviously you need to be looking at that if you do want to.
So this is brilliant, and I'm grateful to you taking us all the way up to the first news. But we're still not really clear on what the grievances are that Tony Blair is addressing. You're absolutely right to say people must be listened to, but I think that the people who are comparing this to Brexit, and oddly, they're the people that told us Brexit would be a good idea, are also right. It does sound like Brexit. People are being told constantly that their lives are being diminished, that they are being oppressed, that they're being bossed around by faceless bureaucrats. I'm sure that phrase is going to pop up. And there must be answers to this question, but are they big enough answers to justify the brouhaha? What are the financial sacrifices and the changes in lifestyle that are being thrust upon people. No one, as far as I'm aware, is being forced to buy a heat pump. If they are, they've been very quiet about it. And similarly with, the ULEZ figures that came in a couple of months ago were pretty much beyond Sadiq Khan's wildest dreams. And none of the scare stories that were absolutely everywhere. I think they even won a by-election, didn't they, in Uxbridge as a consequence of scare stories that were being put out about ULEZ turned out to be absolute rollicks. Which brings us back to the possibility that this is just another Brexit. But will we learn the lesson? And shut down the charlatans, spivs and liars and pay more attention to the experts, or will we go all Michael Gove again and decide that we've had enough of the experts? But none of this fits Tony Blair's intervention, and you can shoot me down in flames for being a naive sap if you so desire, but if Tony Blair sticks his oar in, I think there must be more to it than meets the eye. I could, of course, be wrong, and so could he. Thomas Watts has your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC.
33. You know the way in which the post office drama completely changed the post office story. I've just realised I had a moment like that with fossil fuels. For good or for ill, drama affects us in ways that journalism doesn't. And so when they dramatised the Mr. Bates versus the post office story, it reached parts that Private Eye, much of the country's media and Computer Weekly, who broke the story originally, had failed to reach. They had some brilliant journalism, incredible exposés, scandalous conduct, hideous treatment of innocent people, up to and including imprisonment. But it didn't hit hard enough until ITV made a drama out of it. The Royal Shakespeare Company did a play last year called Kyoto, which had exactly the same impact upon me in the world of fossil fuels. And I only just realised that. I'm sitting here thinking, why do I feel a bit differently about this from how I did last time we talked about similar issues? And the answer is a play that hit me so hard. It hit me as hard as the post office drama hit this country. And it tells the story of a man who you may not even have heard of called Donald Perlman, who essentially became the rallying point for anti-science rhetoric at the UN. He was dedicated to trying to frustrate the scientific consensus, and he was extremely well paid for doing so by the fossil fuel lobby, by the big oil companies. He even did that thing that we have become more familiar with in recent years than any of us would like to be, set up something that sounded clever, sounded like a think tank or an important academic contributor to the conversation, and he was none of those things. He somehow established himself as an expert in matters concerning global climate change and managed to infiltrate the United Nations itself as they were putting together the Kyoto Agreement. It was in 1995 that the German magazine Der Spiegel outed him as a lobbyist for the fossil fuel industry during those negotiations. He had set up a non-governmental organisation called the Climate Council, described himself as the expert, and then with some colleagues, and often in conjunction with the Saudi Arabian delegate, dedicated himself to hair-splitting, prolonging all the negotiations that he could, prompting one climate scientist, Joseph Alcamo, to conclude that he had effectively succeeded in ensuring that the final report no longer reflected the majority scientific opinion. He kept insisting that there was no scientific consensus. You remember? You remember what Maitlis said about the economists? You're searching for an economist, the Minford paradigm. You had to find someone, if you worked for the BBC, who would come on and deny the economic consensus on what Brexit would do, but there was only one, called Patrick Minford, but you could never say, if you were presenting a programme that he was on, you could never say there are 10,000 economists out there who think you're wrong. You're here more or less alone to tell us why you think you're right. And the same thing happened here. The scientific consensus was exactly that, a scientific consensus. But if you've got the money of the fossil fuel industry behind you, you can actually turn that oil tank around, if you pardon the rather felicitous pun. And there it is. The final report no longer reflected the majority scientific opinion because they split every hair. But that's why I don't understand Tony Blair's involvement today, and it's why you're giving me a hard time for suggesting that it is ridiculous to suggest that he is somehow in the pocket of the petrochemical economies like Saudi Arabia, from whom the Institute continued to take money after the murder of Jamal Khashoggi. And yes, those things are all true, but I still don't quite buy it. Sorry. Sarah is in Warwick. Sarah, what would you like to say?
Hello there.
Hello,
I wanted to tell you about our recent experience failing to get a heat pump for our house.
Okay.
So the situation was, it was December. We had a 6-month-old baby in the house. So we had a new baby in the house and our heating packed in.
Right.
So the boiler was less than 10 years old. But it turned out when we had it investigated that it had multiple issues, and it would basically just be cheaper to get a new boiler rather than replace it for various reasons.
Sure.
And it happens to be that our house is the perfect house for a heat pump. It's not a problem with the house. We have amazing insulation. It's an old house, but it's an ex-council house that before we bought the house, the council had put in external insulation on the house, so it's really well insulated.
Okay, I'm going to press fast forward, if I may, very politely, Sarah, and push you towards the questions about financial sacrifices or changes in lifestyle that we're being forced to make, the ones that Tony Blair seems to describe today as valid grievances.
So it boils down to
well
we
done.
needed a thank you. It boils down we needed a boiler fast. We couldn't go into the coldest months of winter with a new baby and no heating.
Yes.
And the process of getting a heat pump boiler, even though we're perfect for it, was horrendous. You need people to come in, do a survey of the house. There's no time scales. And then you look at the price of running the boiler. And even though there's some information out there, we can do our maths, but we couldn't figure out, very quickly couldn't figure out, whether or not it was financially viable, whether it was better off for us to have electricity powering a heat pump or gas powering a gas-powered boiler. We needed this.
What are you telling me, Sarah? What are you telling me? In a headline, in a sentence.
People need to be given the headline numbers immediately. You need a house survey, so get people out there doing the house surveys. Get people the practical information to say, okay, for your house, the numbers are this. For your next door neighbour with a slightly different house, the numbers are that.
But in terms of the financial sacrifices and the changes in lifestyle that are being unfairly inflicted upon people, are you putting anything on that list?
Oh, good grief! We would have loved to have a heat pump. It would have been.
But I know, but no one made you have one.
No one made.
So there's no financial sacrifice or change in lifestyle that's been inflicted upon you.
Well, that's the question. We could not figure out what the financial impact would be, because even though there's some information out there, I mean, my husband does software development. I do databases. We're technical people.
And you still didn't know. So we need a kind of, I don't know, a central database where you type in your postcode or you describe your house. I mean, they talked about doing that. A mate of mine I used to go to houses and assess them for environmental improvements, whether it was insulating the roof or sticking stuff in the walls or quite possibly in the future doing heat pumps. But I'm pretty sure he got closed down. I'm pretty sure he was a victim of cuts. Thank you, Sarah. Jonathan is in Llanelli. I hope I got fairly close to saying that correctly. Jonathan, what would you like to say?
It was a pretty good effort, and how lovely it is to talk to you at last.
Likewise.
So, I was going to start by telling you I thought that Tony Blair was right, but then you mentioned having a moment about the fossil fuel industry, and I thought I'd tell you about that instead.
Yeah, well, no, start with why Tony Blair's right.
Because, essentially, we're being told that we can have our cake and eat it. There's no real political will to actually do.
That's not what he's saying, though, is it? Because I think you're knocking at the door that I'm knocking at this morning. Is Tony Blair's being a defeatist? He's saying we've lost the argument, therefore we need to change our tactics. But that's not necessarily true. I think what Sarah was nudging us towards is that we haven't tried hard enough to win the argument.
Possibly.
Yeah.
Maybe. I'm not going to argue the point with you, to be perfectly honest.
Sure.
My take on it was purely that I think that, a comment that we're not doing the things that we need to do, I think is entirely correct.
Yes.
Just look back at COVID when there were no planes flying and all that, and it made barely a dent in our upward trajectory in carbon levels and all the rest of it, and yet big measures like that are not being taken. It's all little piecemeal bits that, as I say, have your cake and eat it.
So what, I mean, again, and I don't want this to be a gotcha, and certainly no one who's rung in has been trying to claim the opposite. But if we were to make a list of the things that get filed under financial sacrifices and changes in lifestyle, we're going to struggle, right?
Yeah, it would be. I think it's a big change if you want to actually hit the targets that they set. I think we need to make big changes. And actually, there was a TV show, Dr. Brian Cox, a little while ago, went through the numbers in a TV show. I think it's Can We Build a Sun on the Earth, I think it's called. It's about nuclear fusion. But he went through the numbers about how you could decarbonise the UK's energy and what you would actually need to do. And when you listen to that analysis of how do we decarbonise the energy structure in the UK, you think we're not doing anywhere near enough.
Yeah, so this is why I was a bit snicky with you when you rang in, because this isn't what Tony Blair is saying. So you can agree with Tony Blair saying that what we're currently doing isn't right, but the solution he's offering to that problem is not the one that you're in favour of. He's talking about carbon capture, not about decarbonising. He's talking about having more nuclear power and using AI to do things. And I can't see where that argument comes from when almost everybody recognises that carbon capture has never been shown to work on a huge scale. And if I wanted to find someone who I'd like to be led by in a situation like this, I'm going to go to Dr. Brian Cox long before I'm going to go to Tony Blair.
I think carbon capture is the holy grail for the oil industry, I think, isn't it?
Because they can carry on doing exactly what they're doing, keep all the money that they're currently making, and somehow get a free pass on its environmental impacts. Listen, if it works, let's all buy it now and do it, but it doesn't do anything like what it's going to have to do in order to fit the space that Tony Blair has carved out for it this morning.
Which brings me neatly to the moment I had in the oil industry.
Go on.
So I used to work in an oil refinery, and the Health, Safety and Environment Director was asked if they were going to put electric car charging points in the car park, to which she responded, absolutely not. We see electric cars as the enemy. We intend to sell more and more petroleum and diesel. So
give me a slap, will you, Jonathan? Because all of this nudges us to, no, Keith, it's a figure of speech. I'm not, anyway, form a cue at least. All of this is going to make a lot of people listening think that I'm being very, very silly and naive when I dismiss the notion that we need to pay attention to who some of the Tony Blair Institute's clients are when it comes to deciding why he's intervened in this way on this issue.
I think if it was Boris Johnson, we'd pay a lot of attention to was bankrolling him.
I think you're absolutely right. Thank you for not slapping me. It's 10:45.
James O'Brien on LBC.
10:48 is the time. The two advantages. You're looking at what the investment would be, if you like, or what the downside would be on these arguments. James says there is no financial argument against investment in green energy unless you work for an oil or a gas company. It's the way the world is going. Take China, for example. We are led to believe that they aren't investing in this. That's the rhetoric. That's what the permanently online people tell me. But they are. They're miles ahead of everyone else. We used to be leaders in green energy technology. It's technology we can sell to the rest of the world. We're going to miss out on this. And that's from James in Wakefield, who seems to come down between the two stools of what Tony Blair is not saying, that we shouldn't be seeking to massively reduce carbon impacts. But what he is saying is that the way that we're going about it is currently wrong. What I don't think I get my head around yet is why the things that he's suggesting seem to be so inadequate. Carbon capture technology, which doesn't do anything like what it would have to do for it to fill the space that he's carved out for it, and fusion, nuclear fusion, smaller nuclear reactors, which also, don't seem to me to be close to meeting the challenge that he apparently understands. It's mad. The government has responded a little more robustly than they have to other challenges recently. They say the test for everything this government does is whether it will generate investment, jobs, growth, and put money in people's pockets, which it clearly will. Keir reformed the Labour Party from a doe-eyed activist party, this is a number 10 source, to a serious pragmatic government. Gone are the days when Labour allows sentiment or ideals to drive policy. That's interesting. I told you the other day about him not having an ideology, and a few of you sniggered at me. But there it is from a number 10 source, that ideals do not drive our policy. The arch pragmatist always. And then he goes on, net zero is a growth opportunity. And as the PM said last week at the Energy Summit, we are already seeing the benefits. To my knowledge, that's true. But what I don't have knowledge of is, for example, what the financial sacrifices and changes in lifestyle that he identifies as being intolerable actually are. Which doesn't mean they don't exist, it just means we don't know what they are yet. But we will if they exist. We jolly well will. William is in Alloa. William, what would you like to say? Hello? William?
Good morning, James. Well, I am a consultant. Hello?
No,
yes, hello, I'm here.
I think there's something very wrong with your phone, and we'll try and fix that. And I don't think you're a telecommunications consultant, but then nor am I. We'll be right back. James is in Chertsey. James, what would you like to say?
Good morning, James. How
Hello,
are you? There's a lot of James being spoken this morning.
Nothing wrong with that.
There's nothing wrong with that. I'm just completely sat here bewildered with all of this. It's a smoking mirror. It's just being seen to be green. This incentive that the government have put in place, £7,000 toward the installation of a heat pump, when you're looking at the outlay cost is £15,000 to £18,000. Now, I'm a mechanical engineer, been running an engineering company for 30 years, and it's completely dysfunctional. People are being sold the wrong technology. They've got all these incentives in place. MCS, which is the micro certification scheme, have to qualify these products that go into people's properties. They promise them the earth that they're going to do everything. It can do this.
But we haven't found anyone who's got one yet. Do we know what the numbers are? And
I've literally just been to one this morning. I probably do.
No, I meant a
7
slightly
or 8 per week.
Okay, so that's 7 or 8 a week. And so you're installing things that you don't...
No, not installing. No,
what then?
Going to find them that they've been missold, they're not working properly, their energy bill has gone through the roof.
So they'd have those people would have a grievance, but none of them were forced to do what they did.
Absolutely. No, they didn't. No, but they're being led down this path to say, well, a gas boiler costs, say, £7,000.
Yeah.
A heat pump costs £14,000, but you get a £7,000 grant, but your energy fuel cost is going to come down so much. It's not.
I think this is the point Sarah was making about people needing to know the money. But I mean, this isn't really what Tony Blair is talking about. I mean, there must be a future in which heat pumps are fit for purpose and in which they do a pretty good job. Under your analysis of 7 or 8,
100%.
We're just not there yet, and they might work on new build properties. So when he talks about financial sacrifices and changes in lifestyle being inflicted upon people, what do you think he's talking about?
Well, I think what he needs to do is take a look at the bigger picture as to, how are you benefiting by having an air source heat pump? No,
I don't want a phone in about the pros and cons of heat pumps. We'll do that another day. But he has written about the financial sacrifices and changes in lifestyle that not only are being inflicted upon people, but are also driving the nature of the conversation. And I don't know what they are. I don't know what the sacrifices and the changes are. Do you?
No, I don't. I really don't. And I'm just, and that's what I'm sitting here waiting to hear because,
Well, it's a weird one then. So you probably a little bit closer to the idea that the net zero business is a bit of a scam, but you haven't got any...
It is a bit of a scam, but we could have done this years ago. 25 years ago, we had solar thermal, which was big. We had all of this technology. This is not new technology. This is just reinventing the wheel.
I'm just being a bit... I'm being a bit bossy this morning. I'm looking for the evidence of the financial sacrifices and the changes in lifestyle, because that's what Tony Blair is talking about, and I am... I mean, neither of us have managed to come up with any yet, James. But I don't know. I mean, and also, as with everything else, it was a bit like when wind turbines were first introduced, and because they weren't perfect, everyone said we shouldn't have them. I suspect heat pumps will turn out to be similar. As James says, stick them in a new build, you'll be golden. But in a house like mine, we were advised it would be a waste of time. There are clearly lots of people out there who got bad advice or got the wrong advice. But you don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. It just doesn't. The facts as I can find them do not fit the rhetoric that Tony Blair has launched this morning. And that means that one of us is barking up the wrong tree, him or me. And I don't know who at this stage. It is 5 to 11. Big news on the IOPC. That's the Independent Office for Police Conduct investigation into the shooting of Chris Kaba. Fraser Knight, LBC's reporter, is with me in the studio now. Fraser, what do we know?
James, you'll remember that Martin Blake, the firearms officer who shot Chris Kaba dead in South London, he was cleared of murder by a jury at the end of last year. But the IOPC, the police watchdog, were still considering whether or not he should face a misconduct hearing. And in the past few minutes, they have confirmed that they do believe he should face a gross misconduct hearing. So they've directed the Metropolitan Police to carry this out, to put him before a panel to answer to his actions in terms of the professional standards of the police, and he could potentially be facing losing his job over this. Of course, Chris Kaba, an unarmed black man who was driving through Streatham Hill in South London in September 2022. Police had followed that car, pursued that car and brought it to a stop. And during the trial at the Old Bailey, Martin Blake had said he genuinely thought that he was going to be killed as the car that Chris Kaba was in started trying to ram its way out of that blockade. And so the jury agreed with that. They cleared Martin Blake of all of the charges. But
that doesn't change.
That does not change. Absolutely. He is not being held criminally liable for this. But the threshold when it comes to misconduct is much lower. It's a civil threshold. And so the Independent Office for Police Conduct has said it still believes that threshold has been met for this misconduct hearing to be held. Now, in the past few minutes, we've also had a statement from the Metropolitan Police. You might remember the Commissioner, Sir Mark Rowley, after that acquittal, saying that he believed Martin Blake had made huge professional and personal sacrifices, stood by him there. Now they're saying that they know that another lengthy process will fall heavily on the shoulders of Blake and more widely on our firearms officers. They go on to say that armed officers respond to more than 4,000 incidents every year, and there are only one or two occasions where shots are fired. And they've said to make sure that this process remains impartial, they'll be asking a chief officer from another police force to chair that misconduct hearing.
So just to clarify a couple of things, which you already have, but just to drive the points home. I mean, it's a lower threshold than for criminal proceedings, and if that threshold is met, then there must be compelling reasons not to go ahead with the hearing, with the misconduct hearing, and they've decided that there are no compelling reasons. Compelling enough to do that, and it is a police disciplinary panel alone that can decide whether misconduct is proven or not. The IOPC can't do that, but even whatever their findings may be, it has no bearing upon the acquittal in the criminal trial.
Absolutely that, yeah. So it's up to the panel that holds this misconduct hearing to decide whether or not Martin Blake should continue to serve as a police officer or not. Now, of course, you'll remember the sort of shockwaves that this sent right across policing in this country during this trial in the courts. We saw a number of firearms officers stepping back from their duties almost in protest at some of the bits that were going through that trial, and the fact that even that he had been named as well. And so there will be an element of shock and surprise that this is going ahead, I would imagine. But also, perhaps on the other side, not surprising that the IOPC thought it was a strong enough case to take to the courts in the first place. They're standing by that decision to proceed with this gross misconduct hearing. I
mean, we should probably also stress that it's mights and mays, isn't it? There was sufficient evidence to indicate he may have breached the police professional standards regarding his use of force, and therefore there is a case to answer for gross misconduct. There's no way of knowing or predicting what the conclusion of this hearing would be.
Yeah, exactly that. And also, I mean, it's important to stress, of course, after the trial had finished, we were able to reveal that Chris Kaba was a core member of one of London's most notorious gangs. At the moment of that shooting, Martin Blake did not know that was Chris Kaba in the car, and I think that will continue to play a big part in this questioning of him by the gross misconduct panel around whether it was right that he fired that shot through the windscreen, killing Chris Kaba in Streatham Hill. He maintained that he believed he saw Kaba going to pick up a firearm, and then it was later revealed that Chris Kaba was unarmed at that moment, but Martin Blake seriously thinking that him and his colleagues were at serious risk of being killed there, and so that is why he took that fatal shot.
Fraser Knight, thank you very much. I can't imagine there's going to be any developments. I suppose we may hear from some of the parties involved, but otherwise it's a question of waiting for the misconduct hearing to conclude its investigations. Thank you very much indeed. It is 11 o'clock.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 4 minutes after 11 and you are listening to James O'Brien on LBC, where we turn our attention next to an entirely different story. I really like this. I'm never going to do it, but I wish someone would sort of make a kind of archive of the old shows. Pick 5 subjects, some serious, some silly, and then track the pendulum swing over the course of, would you believe how long we've been together now, over the course of 20 years, and see where it goes. Because some subjects I really have been a bit of a weather vane on. I get blown around all over the place. On others, I'm absolutely stalwart, almost unshakable in my convictions. And of course, evidence then comes along to either completely vindicate and validate your original position, or compel you, if you have a mind, compel you to review your position. And some of them would be silly subjects as well, or less serious, although the one that we're about to wade into often feels deadly serious in the context of domestic harmony. But it's an interesting one. So I hope you won't think less of me. Remember, I didn't even have children when I started doing this job. But in the early days of our marriage, when Mrs. O'Brien would express degrees of impatience with my tidiness, I am an untidy person, and I don't say that with any pride. Perhaps I would have done once. It's just who I am. Deal with it. But I noted that I didn't see things that she saw, and I used to try and turn this into a defence or an excuse of what I guess is probably a form of laziness. And I mean, for example, and it's the same with my mum actually. For example, if there's a pile of stuff at the bottom of the stairs that needs to go upstairs, right? Whether it's clothes or whether it's just general domestic detritus, I don't see it. I do now. I'm getting better. I hope she's not listening, because this may be a challengeable position, but I do now notice it a lot more than I used to do. I think as the kids get older and messier, you find yourself tidying up after them, and that's a short hop to tidying up after yourself. But I would not see things. I genuinely wouldn't see things. I would, during periods where I didn't have a lot going on in my career and Mrs. O'Brien was going out to work, she would come back to the flat and I would be absolutely certain that I had tidied up. And she, within moments of walking through the door, would establish that I hadn't. I recognise now that she was right and I was wrong. But what I used to argue, I don't think this is embarrassing. What I used to argue was that if she wanted to live to different standards from mine, then that was her response. Oh, it's going to be quite indefensible, isn't it? Or is it? I mean, it's not like I was leaving unwashed dishes in the sink or anything like that. I just was messy. And I often wouldn't see things. It changes when the children come along, or at least I hope that she'd agree with me that it did for us, but it clearly doesn't for everybody. I thought, when we first started discussing domestic duties a long time ago, I thought that the pendulum was swinging. That's why I talked about pendula a moment ago. I thought the pendulum was swinging. I thought that the increased necessity of both members of a couple going out to work, whether you've got children or not actually, but the conversation we're going to have probably focuses more upon parents because we're talking about the so-called motherhood penalty. But I genuinely believed 15 years ago plus that we were witnessing quite a significant social change, and the days in which women traditionally did about 90% of the homework or housework, or the domestic duties were beginning to undergo quite a seismic change. And that, for example, by the time we got to 2025, the split might not have been 50-50, but it would have been a hell of a lot healthier than it was in 2005. I suppose the dream ratio would be 52-48, but I'll leave you to wonder which way round you would like that to be. If the founder of Mumsnet is correct, then that has not happened. We still live in a world or a country, and again, I'm beginning to really love the question about whether or not we're different in the UK, whether there's something peculiar to these islands when it comes to various social issues, whether there is evidence that we are better than other countries or worse than other countries, and if there is evidence, then why might that be? 9 minutes after 11 is the time. And what Justine Roberts has identified, or what she has reiterated, is that, and I quote, men are the problem. And I think that 20 years ago, I would have started being a bit cheeky chappy at this point. I would have started doing the line about, well, I don't know that we're actually the problem here, because I am happy. So here is a room. Here is a home, okay? Here is a home that we share. And this is the state it is currently in, okay? The cushions are perhaps dishevelled. There may be an open but neatly folded bag of crisps on the coffee table. A large bag of Twiglets, one that you can't eat in one sitting. So you've kept it in a bag, and you've folded the bag in half and you've popped it. There are a few books lying around. In fact, the books that were lying around, I have tidied up into a neat stack, which is also in the middle of the coffee table, or on the edge, like, artistically arranged. I may not have hoovered because I can't actually see anything on the floor that constitutes, I'm doing it. It's so easy to slide into that cheeky chappy persona, which is born of guilt. In a nice way, not in a kind of, oh, woe is me, self-flagellation, hair shirt kind of way. But it's a bit like the Boris Johnson approach to problems. You try and charm and bluster your way out of them. But even that is an acknowledgement that there is actually a problem, and you are acknowledging it even though as you seek to deny it, even as you seek to deny, oh, don't be ridiculous. But I kind of thought I meant it at the time. If you want to share this space with me, then, and you are not happy with it in its current state, then I am not going to object to you improving it. Do you see what I mean? Do you see how bad that was? I want to share this space with you. I should really be meeting you at least halfway on making it as pleasant for you as it is for me. I mean, not unrealistic expectations. I don't mean that you should be able to see a reflection in the coffee table. I simply mean that it shouldn't have a bag of Twiglets on it. And if you have been eating Twiglets in a carpeted room, chances are that the little bit around the sofa where you were sitting, at the very least, needs to be hoovered. But because I wouldn't see it, I didn't think I should have to do it. And then, as I say, I hope that I began to grow up. I certainly began to recognise that when children come along, all of these things should change. But apparently they haven't. So the founder of Mumsnet has said there is a problem in the home. When we ask our users about this, they say the mother is still taking on the bulk of the domestic responsibility. So 90% of the interactions with the school, 90% of the play dates being organised, 90% of the holidays and the packing of packed lunches. Until that changes, we just have to accept that women are doing too much. They've also potentially got caring responsibilities the other way as well, with ageing parents. In the end, and this is working parents, whatever employers do, it's just not a fair equation. I think the single biggest problem is that, and the way to solve it is to get more men involved. She adds, part of that is cultural, part of it is shame, and I'm happy to shame dads. I don't like doing phone-ins that hinge upon the question, how angry are you? But every now and then it's almost the only question that fits the story that I want to talk about. Because there should come a point in a relationship, and I'm not here to lecture you, and I'm certainly not here to do the old holier-than-thou thing, although sometimes I guess we can slip into that without noticing. But it shouldn't be enough, should it, to simply say, well, I do things when she asks me. And this is a gender split. This is a male-female conversation. I do things when she asks me. I still catch myself occasionally expecting a biscuit or a pat on the head when I do something. Not very often anymore. If the dishwasher is full, if the dishwasher is finished, empty the dishwasher. If the kids have made a sandwich and left a mess on the worktops, either shout at the kids or rather politely invite them to come and clean it up. But if they've gone out, just wipe it down so that the next person to walk into the room doesn't have to deal with it. Because if you don't do it, someone else will. You get that. Once you get that into your head, I find, and I'm still far from perfect on this front, but once you get it into your head that if you don't do it, someone else will have to, then it slowly stops being a chore and just becomes a necessity. It becomes part of the cycle of life. I think for mums or for women, that becomes true much earlier than it does for men. And clearly, if Justine Roberts is correct, then for some men, it never becomes true at all. The Open University studied a commission that's found nearly 2 in 5 mothers it's almost half, are concerned about the lack of flexibility in working hours when considering their careers. But men generally aren't, which tells you all you need to know about the scale of the burden that mums shoulder when it comes to keeping the domestic ship afloat. 90% of the interactions, 90% with school, 90% of the play dates being organised. We haven't even touched upon housework, but that's almost certainly going to be part of the issue as well. I don't want you to call me if you are going to boast about how much housework you do as a bloke. I'm not even sure that we need blokes to contribute much to this conversation. It's the Employment Minister, Alistair McGovern, who kicked off the event that Justine Roberts was talking at by saying that having a kid still feels like setting a bomb off underneath your career. So that's what I want you to talk to me about. It's about how much further or not the division of labour in your home has come from the division of labour in the home you grew up in. How frustrating is it? What happens if he feels no shame? That is a recipe for domestic disaster. It's all very well talking about shaming the dads, but what if the dad gives it the, well, I mow the lawn line, or I don't mind that the room is a bit untidy. I don't understand why we have to have cushions on the bed. I don't know why it's such a crime against humanity to have a bag of Twiglets on the coffee table. Do you see what I mean? What do you do if he won't be shamed? 0345 6060 973. And it may not be how angry does it make you, but how bad is it? How bad is it? Does it, knock the gloss off romance almost when you sort of realise, maybe you're listening to this and the penny's actually dropping, you're thinking, yeah, 90% of the interactions with the school, 90% of playdates, 90% of housework, 90% of packed lunches, 90% of the holidays, whatever it may be. You're already paid less at work. When you enter the workforce, you're paid about 5.2% less than a male counterpart on average, gets up to 13% towards the end of a woman's career, and it's called the motherhood penalty. So in a way, the idea is that because mothers are shouldering so much at home, do you want to know what the names of the first 3 people on my switchboard are? This always happens. I've got a Joseph, I've got a Philip, and I've got an Erkan. All males. That is part of the problem, lads. I told you not to ring me to boast about how much housework you do. And the second reason to ring in would, probably to be challenge the premise of the entire conversation. So we can bid farewell to all 3 of you, unless, of course, you're bringing something to the table that is not ploddingly predictable and deeply manocentric, because it's about a failure for society to change. And that leads me to my final question. And this is huge. This is as relevant today as it was when I was a kid. Oh, by a kid, I mean when I was a young husband. Why? Why does this happen? Now, not when your mum and dad were raising you, but now, in our society now, why does this happen? 0345, in fact, that's the question I want, more than all of the others. 0345 6060 973. Given that we now both work, more often than not, we no longer subscribe to 1950s models of I bring home the bacon and you cook it, or whatever hideous cliche you prefer. The importance of both salaries to keeping the domestic ship afloat, whether you're talking about paying the mortgages or paying the rent, paying the childcare fees, keeping everything on an even keel. There are 2 possible, there's one obvious answer to this, and that is a perception that her job is not as important as his job. But that I'm not going to put words in your mouth. That's one possible answer to this question. 0345 6060 973. And I don't know what the other answers would be. Why is this still going on? When the mum stayed at home and the dad went to work, it was a relatively natural division of labour and responsibility. It may not have been fair or felicitous, but it was relatively natural, right? But if you're both going to work, why is it still the case that the woman is likely to do the massive majority of the work, of the home-based work? Why? And, of course, how frustrating can it get? Hit the numbers now, you will get through. 0345 6060 973 is the number you need. It's 11:19.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It's 21 minutes after 11. I think I might read these out without comment, okay? But there are no prizes for guessing whether these have been sent in by men or by women. So here is the first. The bacon needs to be brought home and it needs to be cooked. It doesn't matter who does what, but if they insist on it being equal all the time, then they don't get to bring home much bacon. I guess the answer as to why this division of labour domestically still persists in 2025 could be answered obliquely. Another one, this is from Adrian. It's often because they... I presume in both of these messages, they just means women, right? It's often because they are control freaks. Is it, mate? Okay. Let's continue with this. Here's a good one. Anonymous, please. No. Why would you want men to call in to sexist LBC? I'm so enraged. I couldn't call in even if I had the time. Mate, you've had time to send me about a 4-paragraph text. But anyway, let's be careful what we wish for. I tell you what, a lot of mums, the mum of my children do with 90% of their time, they sit there looking at a freaking phone screen and then whine at the man if he dares to sit down after working an 80-plus hour week, or sit down after working the whole year through with no breaks and has 2 weeks off at Christmas. And he would still get up and do the kids' breakfast and make their lunches and take them to the doctors and deal with the school and organise birthday parties, etc, 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 says Anonymous, who I suspect probably has a lot of anger, and maybe some of it is justified. I'm not going to be mean. No shame and no awareness. These examples are set at home. It certainly takes the gloss off romance, writes Sarah. You lose some respect. It builds resentment, as well as the fact that women are paid less. After 25 years of it, my solution was to make him spend some of the pension pot and buy us a bolt hole in Spain. I'm very sad and tired that so little has changed. You can tell that's from a woman, and you can tell this is from a man. Stop, writes Joe, demonising the role of a stay-at-home parent. So Joe's just heard a conversation about parents who do not stay at home, about the division of labour among two parents who go to work, and he's decided to text the radio station saying, stop demonising the role of a stay-at-home parent. I guess all human life is here. Debbie's in Leamington Spa. Debbie, what would you like to say?
Oh, hi, James.
Hello, Debbie.
So, me and my husband have been together coming on 30 years. And when we first moved in
I got a clicky phone line. It's not your fault. It's not your fault. We'll try and sort it out, and we'll try and get back to you as quickly as we can. But it can be hugely irritating. Tanika is in Romford. Tanika, what would you like to say?
Hi, James.
Hello.
I was just talking to your researcher, and I think you touched upon it, like in terms of the cultural aspect.
Yeah.
So me and my husband, I'm from a West Indian background, and he's from a Spanish background.
Okay.
And there's definitely an element where it's both of us were probably just socialised, and that's what we saw. And it definitely didn't always start off that way, but I've recently returned to work after maternity, and I was reflecting that I think paternity leave has a lot to do with it.
Go on.
He got 2 weeks off.
Yeah.
And I was at home, you know, and it was great being at home, and it meant that I could do housewifey things.
Oh, so it established a pattern. It established a model.
I really, really think so.
Oh, that's good.
And I have recently returned to work, and I was able to do a shift, but he never had a shift to do.
Yeah.
Because 2 weeks just wasn't enough, and our little boy was in NICU. So even worse, he never came home when my husband could be at home.
Oh.
And so even less, he had less of an opportunity to shift. And this is not me defending the nonsense that is my life.
So there's two things going on here. There's two paradigms. The first paradigm is your own childhood.
There's a nurture thing happening.
Your own childhood and what you witnessed then. And the second one is established by the nature of parental leave, which means, I mean, perhaps inevitably, especially if we're going to bring breastfeeding and things like that into the equation, perhaps inevitably, there are opportunities now for men to take more, but they generally choose not to. And that also creates the idea that now has become your Ballywick, you're bailiwick. You're kind of, and can you have you tried to push? I mean, you've only just gone back to work, but that's when the trouble starts. Not to ruin your day, but when you're in this established pattern of behaviour because you are at home all day or you are on parental leave, and then you go back to work, and the established pattern of behaviour begins to
in bed.
Yeah.
We've had conversations. So as silly as it sounds, we've kind of started doing like blue jobs, pink jobs.
Doesn't sound silly.
But it just means that, as silly, and I never thought I'd fall into that way. But actually for him, knowing that, bins go out on a Wednesday, the lawn gets cut every 2 weeks, he can almost put it in his Google Calendar and be like, yeah, there's that thing I've got to do.
Yeah.
And actually I don't care if it has to happen that way, because it's not me having to say, well,
But what about the other stuff? I mean, because they're quite, I'm going to get chucked out of the Brotherhood for saying this, but they're quite easy jobs. The bins may be a little bit tricky, but also they're regular. They're not every day, and they are quite easy. The stuff like interactions, you won't have this yet, but interactions with the school. Well, you'll have interactions with childcare, sorting out.
Yeah, nursery. I'm already the first port of call. I mean, we have a shared calendar,
right?
So let's see how it goes.
Yeah,
and it becomes about him. I think he's quite a methodological person, and if it's written down somewhere, he can do it. And so we just chuck stuff in a calendar. We're in the really early stages.
Well, I wish you the best. I think your analysis is brilliant. And forewarned is forearmed, Tonika, isn't it? So, knowing
we're just trying to do things differently.
Well, final point. I want to talk to Halima. One message from Nick actually says some of the comments you've just read out, they need to be reminded that it's a partnership, not a fight.
Yeah.
And it sounds like that's where you are at the moment. It's a partnership.
I say all of that, and he's an amazing husband and a great dad, and I wouldn't change him. But I think we just have to make a conscious effort to not fall into habits of old.
Yeah, and I wonder why we still do. That's two brilliant answers. Answer number one, our own childhoods, because that's how the labour was divided at home, often when one parent wasn't going out to work. And answer number two, the first months of parenthood, establish a pattern where he is usually at work and she is usually not. Harriet's in Kingston. Harriet, what would you like to say?
So I do all the housework in our house, mainly because I do it properly, and my husband does not do it properly.
He could.
No, he can't. If he washes the floor, it's left soaking. If he hoovers, it's not hoovered properly. But we're actually quite old-fashioned. This is our second marriage, and we've been married for 5 years. But I'm a dog sitter, so I can have like 13 dogs in the house at any time. So I take it. So I need to be responsible.
What's the point of hoovering?
Well, this is the thing. I know I do it a lot, and it sometimes is absolutely crazy. But I do it because only I can do it in the way that I want it. And to be honest with you, we're quite happy in our established roles. I don't feel but he notices my children's mess all the time, but he doesn't notice his own.
I think that's what's called weaponised incompetence.
Thank you.
Because he is perfectly capable of doing better, but he knows that he doesn't have to because I kind of indulge him. And it sounds quite loving, this, so I don't want to rain on anybody's parade, but it must be slightly irritating for your children if he's leaving his detritus all over the place and they kind of sense that they're not really allowed to.
Well, he's actually a very tidy man, but he gets dressed for work downstairs, so he leaves coat hangers all over the place, which drives me absolutely insane.
Yeah.
But he's actually not a mess. So he does have some grounds, and my daughters are just incredibly messy. But and I know it's super, and it's really old-fashioned, but we are.
It's not that old-fashioned what you're describing, because you're working from home.
Yeah.
And therefore you have got much more time every day, and you're looking after dogs, which I appreciate is time consuming, but it's not like an office job, is it?
No.
You can if the dog drops something, you can pick it up. You're not 2 miles away sitting behind a desk.
No, I mean, sometimes it's awful, but then again, that's my responsibility because, you come down and dogs, when there's large numbers of dogs, they forget their training. They're just awful.
Yes.
Yeah, in the height of summer, 13,
okay.
yeah.
Okay.
I've got 6 in the house at the moment.
Does he wash his car?
No, we go to a hand car wash.
Okay, because Paul points out that if you've ever seen a bloke clean and polish his motorbike or his sports car, you'll get a much better idea of what they're actually capable of.
Oh, his car is immaculate, and he gets very cross in my car.
Funny that, eh?
Yeah.
Funny that. Sitting room, not so much when he's in charge, but the car, holy moly, you could eat your dinner off the passenger seat. I had a mate, still a mate of mine actually, but he used to be a colleague. And he's a wonderful modern man and a brilliant husband and dad. But we called him Toothbrush because he was telling us once, as cool as you like, most casual thing in the world, that he'd been cleaning his car at the weekend. And I can't remember how the subject came up. It's obviously not a particular area of interest for me, cars in general, cleaning them in particular. And he was explaining how he used a toothbrush to clean his alloys. And so that was the point at which he became Johnny Toothbrush. And for me, at least, I don't think he's had 3 or 4 jobs since then. But for me, at least, he still is. It's 11:31. Thomas Watts is here with your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC.
6 minutes to 12 is the time. Mike's been in touch. Lol, he writes, I'm blushing. You should see the care and time I put into cleaning a guitar. Listen, if it works for you, it works for you. I think the days of me sitting here being all Billy Big Bananas and trying to lay down the law on how people should behave are long behind me. In fact, I don't know whether you found this in your life, but the more strident people are about how couples should conduct themselves, often the more they tempt fate to themselves. I used to say this thing. I used to think that if you don't argue, then you don't really have passion in your lives, or you don't have passion in your relationships. And I saw George Clooney the other day. It's remarkable how much we have in common. I saw George Clooney the other day saying that him and his wife never argue. And since I went to therapy, the notion that you have to argue to prove that you've got passion in a relationship strikes me as not just a little bit ridiculous, but also a little bit dangerous. So I don't do that anymore. But I do find myself thinking that you're storing up a lot of trouble for the future if you're not pulling at least most of your weight around the home. And even if your partner then decides just to live with it, that trouble that you're storing up is still there. Martha's been in touch. She says, I'm just waiting, I'm bracing for the inevitable not all men BS now. Well, you should trust me more, Martha. I can deal with that. The division of labour is completely unequal. My own experience and my friends all feel the same. Naffle, she almost wrote, but used the word I can't say on the radio. Naffle has changed since I was a kid, and it's deeply depressing. So there are 2 questions here. Is that true? Is it pretty much the same, probably for the reasons that Tanika mentioned, pretty much the same as it was when you were a child in your house and you hate it? And if so, why? Why is it still like that? 0345 6060 973. Halima is in Blackburn. Halima, what would you like to say?
Hi, James.
Hello.
My views on this are, me and my husband are both from an Indian background, so we have got very cultural values and been brought up in that way. My dad was the same. My dad still doesn't lift a finger, and my mum does everything. Granted, when we were little, he was always at work.
Yes.
But even since he's retired, she waits on him hand and foot.
Oh, boy.
In my house, my husband does very little. And I'm very grateful that he works a lot. To give us the life that he gives us. However, I go to work as well. And this is the reason why I refuse to work more than my 20 hours a week that I do. Because I've got, on my days off, cooking, cleaning. I've been to the gym this morning. I've been and done the food shop. I need to go and make dinner for the next couple of days whilst I'm at work. So it's all there, that pressure, that constant, what do I need to do today whilst I'm off so that the next 3 days run smoothly. That calendar just never ends.
Yeah, that's the difference, isn't it? And this is where the idea of having set tasks to do, and even if there's quite a lot of them, it's something that you can tick off and move on. Whereas what you describe, the fundamental business of keeping a home running, is never over. You never just tick it off and relax now.
No, absolutely not.
That's the key difference.
With all the diaries, all the appointments, all the school things, all the extracurricular activities, all the days out, all that, because he's always at work. And I'm very grateful that he works really hard.
I mean, again, this is why I made the point earlier about if it works for you, it works for you. Because if he is always at work, then it would be unreasonable to expect him to come home and do a lot. But he could do more than he currently does.
Absolutely. But then at the same time, it's those little bits like, can you do the kids' reading or the homework whilst I tidy the kitchen? And those little things that don't get done, that's when it kind of really annoys me. And sometimes I have to think, you know what, let it slide. You have to massively choose your battles in order for your marriage to stay steady. Because as with everything, there's always peaks and troughs.
You're so right.
And
you're so right.
When you're in the height of it, when everything gets too much, that's when it all comes out. And like you said, you have to argue at times. However, I've come through 10 years of marriage now, thankfully,
and it sounds, I mean, it sounds as if it's working for you. What you remind us of, though, is that if you're biting your tongue too often, then when it does bubble over, it's really not. It's not good. I mean, the more resentment that is filed away, the more explosive the rows when they come will be. So you're absolutely right. You just got to pick your moments. You've got to do some of it.
Oh, absolutely.
Let me run something by
absolutely.
you. So this is what I would have had you rung in 15 years ago to this program, and we were having this conversation. I would now have tried what I used to call the prehistoric defence. Are you familiar with the prehistoric defence, Halima?
No.
Well, if you think back to prehistoric times, my job would have been to go out, sometimes for days on end, in pursuit of food. You know, whether I was trying to bring down a wild boar with my hand-chiselled spear, or whether I was simply going to my favourite foraging places to find nuts and berries and things, perhaps some nice mushrooms. And this was a big deal. And I do it with all of my male companions, and we would be selected largely on the grounds of strength and stamina, which meant that it was more likely to be the masculine pursuit, and it was very exhausting. And you would stay at home, perhaps in the cave, depending on precisely what prehistoric era we're talking about, and you'd be looking after the children and maybe even looking after the animals that we domesticated. We may have had a few hens, a couple of dogs, and keeping everything ticking along. And then when I came back from my hunter-gathering shift, I'd be so exhausted that all I wanted to do was just sit down and stare at the fire. And that is where the modern-day television comes in. All I want to do when I get in, all he wants to do when he gets in is sit down and stare at the fire. So it is genetically programmed within us to behave in this way. What do you say to that?
I completely agree.
What? What?
in the sense that is where we've come from.
Yes.
And how modern society tries to change that. And I understand it's not always for the better. But things like you going back to tidying up after yourself, cleaning up after yourself, those little things are the things that you should be able to take care of. Because God forbid if I drop dead tomorrow.
It's almost, you could almost go on strike.
How do you operate the washing machine? I mean, Uber will take care of the food, but how do you operate the washing machine, and how do you iron the uniform? All those kinds of things.
These are crucial questions. A division of labour, I mean, is intrinsic to any successful household, any successful relationship. But an unequal division of labour is going to come back and bite you on the backside. And what you can't do is decide what other people are happy with and not happy with. Some people would be living with a division that they are perfectly happy with that you would find intolerable, and vice versa. There's no objective algorithm for this, but I suspect that Justine Roberts is right when she talks about the motherhood penalty, the gap between what two members of the workforce will be paid according to whether they are men or women is going to be partly down to a combination of a perception that her job is less important in the home, which is caused partly by the fact that her role is so much greater on the domestic front, and alongside that, the price that you pay at work, the professional price you pay for the unfair domestic division of duty. So we've been talking about this a lot recently. My wife did an article, I told you, didn't I, for a Danish newspaper. Well, for The Guardian here and a Danish newspaper. It was like a job swap with a Danish journalist who was also a mum, going back quite a long time. And we went to Copenhagen and lived there, and she went to the office. I wasn't part of the experiment or part of the article, but what was fascinating was the rules that the Danish employers had in place, I think legally binding rules about things like being able to leave work early to do childcare. But guess what? They were not gender specific. So I think 2 days a week, every employee could leave work early to do childcare duties. And that meant, if there were two parents involved, that's 4 days a week that you've got it sorted. There's only 1 day a week, and school maybe finishes, I don't know, I might have after-school club on the 5th day. But that, if you've got both parents getting a dispensation from their employer, and it was taken up, it's not like this country where men have the opportunity to take paternal leave and don't. But it was designed, literally, the employer is constantly saying, or the government is constantly compelling employers to ask, how can I have a more efficient workforce? How can I make life easier for my staff who are parents? And I think in the UK, we're a long way away from that. Halima, thank you. From Blackburn to Rome, where Joy is waiting. Joy, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. It's nice
Joy.
to talk to you finally.
Likewise.
Hi, this is a great subject. And in fact, I was saying to your producer that just yesterday I was talking with a work colleague who's a mother.
Yes.
And about the restrictions and I'm glad you brought up the motherhood penalty that we do pay in society, where you do a full day's work and you do a full day's work at home.
Yes.
And I think it's really complex. I think it's very multifaceted. I must start by saying I have a wonderful husband who I actually wouldn't change.
Right.
However, I do think it is. I mean, we've been together, I think, since about 30 years coming up to, more or less.
Right.
And we met. I was living on my own for some years, had my own flat and whatever, and he was still living at his mother's house, a very big house, independently,
in the country,
codependent, if you like. Sorry?
No, sorry, that's just me being an idiot. You said a very big house, like that Blur lyric,
No,
immediately I just said in the country.
Right in the heart,
a very big
in the
house.
heart of
is he? He's Italian, is he?
He is. Difference. I think, you've got to also take that into account.
Yes.
A lot of us are living in multicultural, households. So he was brought up that he had, live-in help, and his mother, however, did work. She was divorced and all the rest of it. House chores he wasn't expected to do and didn't do. They had paid help. Whereas I was brought up still very well, but, I knew
There's
how
a huge
to live on my
difference
own.
between...
You knew how to...
Well, I guess organising the household staff can be quite taxing, Joy. I've watched Downton Abbey. It's not a walk in the park, keeping an army...
It wasn't like that. It wasn't like that. But I think...
I think the phone line's a bit... The phone line's a bit funny. In a nutshell, because I'm late for the break as well, why have things changed so little, do you think, given that the work...
I think it is also to do with the structure of society. Big bosses still don't do their own stuff. Their wives maybe don't work. They have, a lot of help. So they don't, I think, get the point that, the average woman who does work needs to have more time off, to look after silly little things like, going to a school play, picking up kids early, taking them to various sports events and all the rest of it. And also, I think men have less flexibility in general also to put their hand up and say that.
And we're also allowed to. We're allowed, sorry to cut you off in your prime, I've got to go to the break, but we're allowed to from quite an early age. We're allowed to hand over responsibility. I was with a friend the other day who's extremely important. And has a PA who organises one side of his life, and then a kind of factotum who organises the other side of his life. Didn't bat an eyelid. I didn't bat an eyelid as he was sort of half joking about it. And it would be weirder for a woman. There will be women, massive CEOs, who are like that. But it would be weirder for a woman to no, he wasn't boasting, but just to casually credit the PA and then the factotum with running every single aspect of his life. And women rarely feel that they have that luxury or even that right. Joy, thank you. It's 11:47.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 10 to 12. You are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. I love this. I love it when this happens. So two messages in response to the same little vignette or the same little picture that I painted on the programme a moment ago. Rosie got in touch on Blue Sky to say, I can almost hear you, Rosie, going, James, excuse me a moment. That hunter-gatherer story you just told is a complete fantasy. I'm assuming that was deliberate. You're right. That's why I even prefaced it when I was talking to Halima by saying, if this was 15 years ago and I was still in that zone, that mode, which I'd somewhat probably euphemistically describe as cheeky chappy, but might be a little bit nastier than that, then yeah, of course it is. But many people will have heard it straight and thought, oh yes, that's right. I come home at the end of the day and I like to stare into the fire. And the modern day fire is the television. You see, here's an example. Your genetic reasoning has some merit, James, said this texter in response to the same story. Look at a pride of lions. The male does very little, rarely joins in the hunt, but is usually the first to eat. His role in the pride is at a moment's notice to defend that pride and his offspring against other male lions. He can't do that if he's exhausted himself on a hunt. Well, that's what he says. I don't know if it's ever been tested. Now, of course, we don't have that same situation in the human race these days, but you can see where roles come from in the mammalian world. I kind of half buy that. Eleanor's not convinced that we should be projecting a lion's experience onto a human, but of course we all come from the same genetic roots. So I think the mammalian experience... Did you know that fish can't blink? Only mammals can blink. So there is a commonality of the mammal world that possibly extends to childcare and blinking. I don't know. Speaking of blinking, the reason I wanted to mention this to you in the last hour with regard to Tony Blair, because it just made me chuckle. I was wondering how much heft Tony Blair has with people in their 20s or even their 30s, you know, whether or not his name is one of those clanging interventions. Tony Blair has spoken, as we were discussing in the first hour. But I was at a quiz last night for my late friend Andy's charity. We did a quiz with some sort of cool media types. And one of the questions absolutely blew me away. Truly blew me away. A, the question, and B, the reaction in the room. And I'm not sure I've ever felt every one of my 53 years more keenly than I did at that moment. Because the two lads who were doing it, great quizmasters, they asked, on the true or false round, they said, the England men's football team last won the World Cup in 1969, true or false? And I thought, either there's been a mistake, there's a glitch in the matrix, or or it's a trick question and I need to pay attention to it. Do you know what I mean? There was a trick question about a band that announced it was reforming after controversially splitting up, and everyone said Oasis, but it was actually the Libertines. So I thought it was another trick question. And it wasn't. And there wasn't even you know when you're at a quiz and certain questions get responses in the room, like a collective intake of breath or a giggle or oh, blimey. There was nothing. So most people in the room, 20s, early 30s, and that question did not hit the room as ridiculous. It was a true or false puzzle. I don't think everybody even got it right. One of the people on my table thought the England men's football team had never won the World Cup. So they wanted to say false because they had never won the World Cup, and therefore having won it in 69 couldn't be true. They weren't particularly sporty types or football-y types necessarily. Some of the lads probably were, but I just found that stunning. I just thought it's such a baked-in part of our national story, the 1966 victory, that everybody would know it. Like the man that walked on the moon. Did a man ever walk on the moon? A man has walked on the moon, true or false? England has won the Football World Cup, true or false? That, to me, they'd be on the same kind of cup. No, absolutely. I mean, it was just extraordinary. 55 minutes after 11. Callum's been in touch to tell us that birds can also blink. Oh, you live and learn. Louise is in Burton Latimer in Northamptonshire to probably close the conversation because PMQs is around the corner about the motherhood penalty. Louise, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. I'm first-time caller, so I'm a little bit nervous.
It's only me.
I'm ringing basically just in defence of my husband, actually, so don't shout at me. I know that a lot of what you're saying is...
Don't shout at anyone. How dare you? Go on.
I know that it's happening out there, but in terms of my situation and my relationship, it couldn't be more fair, and I'm ringing in defence of my husband to just say he's just basically brilliant, and I couldn't do it without him.
How did you do it? How did you establish it from the get-go? Because, I mean, are we talking 52-48 domestic division, or are we going for the absolute golden ratio?
I think I'm better at cleaning the toilets, but, you know, there's still pink and blue jobs in the house, but I couldn't really ask him to be a better teammate, and I think that's the key, is that we're teammates.
How long have you been married?
We've been married 13 years.
Okay, I thought you were going to say 2 weeks. And, and did you talk about this from the start, or did it just kind of settle into a pattern?
I was saying to your researcher, I think he was brought up well. His mum is very strong-minded, independent woman, and I think from the start he was, kind of aware of feminism and women's rights, and basically respected that.
And if he doesn't do that job, someone else will have to, i.e. you.
Yeah. And I said to your researcher, I have Crohn's disease, and it's not an excuse, but I get tired.
Yes.
I couldn't breastfeed when I had my first child. I was told not to because of the medication I was on. And so my husband was up in the night with our baby as much as I was. And it was sort of the rules and the routines and the established way of working between us was set really early on. And I think that's the key in a relationship. You've got to set the boundaries early doors.
And that word team, that word team is perfect, isn't it? I can't believe it's taken us an hour to get there. If you're a team, then, I don't feel like you're part of my team would be such a terrible thing to say to the love of your life, wouldn't it?
Yeah, he's my teammate. He's my wingman, and I couldn't do without him. And I just think there are a lot of relationships and marriages out there that perhaps don't have that essence.
Well, do you know what? I wouldn't come to work every day if I didn't think we could all improve or get better, not just in the context of what we're discussing today, but in pretty much every area of life, from critical thinking to housework. I wouldn't do it, and you will have touched some people there. There will be some people listening to this who think, do you know what? If this was a team, I'd probably be dropped. I'd probably be warming the bench. I'd probably be on the substitutes roster, and that you've just done that. That's lovely. That's really nice. Quite romantic as well. It is 11:58. It is almost time for PMQs. Natasha Clarke is here, LBC's political editor, to tell us what might say. I'm giggling because my friend Scott texted to say, tell this woman to blink twice if he's in the room with her now. Scott, you're a cynical old git, frankly, and I'm not going to countenance your so-called comedy for a moment longer. What are we expecting to come up today, Natasha?
Good morning, James. Yeah, obviously it's the local elections tomorrow, my favourite time of year, and it's the final chance, obviously, both sides will have, and of course Davey as well, to get his messages out there before voters go to the polls tomorrow. So it is going to, I think, be quite hyper-local issues today.
Oh, do you?
Yeah, I think things like, bins, councils, taxes, the Tories will want to say, we're the ones that keep your council tax low, and Labour will want to say, essentially, we're the ones that have been delivering for the last 9 months while we've been in government. Keep voting for us to deliver for your local services. Where they, of course, will have a bit of a difficult ride will be in areas around Birmingham because of what's been going on with local democracy there, the councils, the bin strikes, and of course the recent explosive intervention from Tony Blair, which you've been discussing the last hour. She
has to bring that up. I probably misrepresent it slightly and claim that he's also poo-pooing net zero itself, as opposed to the tactics that are currently being employed to achieve net zero, which he is not poo-pooing.
Yeah, and actually in the last sort of half an hour or so, we've just had a statement come in from the TBI, the Tony Blair Institute, clarifying what Tony Blair really meant to say.
Funny that.
Was this. The TBI report is clear. It says the UK government is already pursuing these goals. Their approach is the right one. We must prioritise technologies which capture carbon, place a bigger emphasis on protecting and enhancing nature, and develop a new nuclear power. So essentially, they're saying in the statement, what we meant to say was about international policy. And actually, that was where...
I'm going to give you a sting. Have you had a sting before?
Go on.
Missed information.
That's what it was. Thank you, Emily. So all of the media coverage going down one road, Tony Blair Institute, slightly clarifying.
Did you read the full foreword from Tony Blair?
I did, yes.
Yeah, and I did think actually...
Didn't mention the UK specifically once.
It did talk about domestic policies, and it talked about...
In all countries.
Yeah, exactly. But this statement says, actually, we were talking about, international issues. But I think in that statement, which, like I say, is signed by Mr. Blair himself, he would have known the impact of saying something like that.
That's probably true, yeah.
He's in close...
So what was he playing at?
Well, I think this is part of a bigger game for the government. And if the rumours are to be believed, what's happening in government is that Keir Starmer and Ed Miliband are a little bit at loggerheads about exactly how to play energy policy and how to get to net zero. And I think that we might see that play out in the next couple of weeks.
How did you get on in the marathon, Dave wants to know?
Good. Yeah, it was really hard.
Was it?
It was
What was
really
your,
tough.
did you win?
Did I win? Well, I beat Robert Jenrick. That's all that matters. Did I win the marathon?
No,
of course
I used to do that. I used to think that was so funny. It comes from a place of guilt and shame, as all the bad stuff.
Yeah, what was your
does.
time for the marathon?
Exactly. So I'm never going to run a marathon in my life. So when a colleague runs the marathon, I always come to work on Monday morning. I go, "Did you win?
Yeah,
did you win with like a really big cheesy grin
my,
on my face?"
Well, I won in the fact
What an idiot.
I won against myself because I'd never done it before. I got PB.
Brilliant.
Because,
That's fantastic. That's sensational.
No, it was good. Honestly, I came out of it thinking, well done me. But also, when I heard that I'd beaten Robert Jenrick and Matt Hancock, that really, really put the icing on the cake there. So that was good.
Were you raising money?
Yes, raised money for Globals Make Some Noise. I've raised more than £2,000 for some really good charities. So
well
very
done.
happy.
Seriously,
very
that
happy
is
about
just
that.
an unalloyed good, a brilliant achievement. Are we sure there are elections in Birmingham tomorrow?
I think there are around not exactly in Birmingham City Council, but I think some of the surrounding areas.
Okay.
I think I want to say Worcestershire is the nearest.
Worcestershire. Sorry, if you've just visited us from Texas, you know you're talking to us live from Leicester Square.
Yeah, exactly. I think
Worcestershire.
Yes, is the nearest to Birmingham.
Probably slightly resentful of being lumped in with
they
Birmingham.
Probably are.
It happens
you're
a lot.
Right.
It happens a lot. So we think net zero. We think probably council elections.
Yeah, bit of bins, bit of immigration, bit of net zero.
Bit of immigration.
I think if you're Kemi Badenoch, you want to put it back to Keir
She was quite good last week.
I think she was better.
And the bar is low.
She is getting better. I think she is getting better. I think
all the time.
What we've talked about before of like the Kemi Badenoch emergency buttons, she's learning what I think works in terms of topics and what doesn't work. And I think net zero and the environment is a clear dividing line between the two parties. There is a bit of political consensus starting to disintegrate, I think, a little bit around net zero. And there are people that are worried about that and what it means for bills, what it means for consumers.
Well, I spent an hour this morning trying to find out what these grievances are, bearing in mind that some people have described it as the new Brexit. And as James O. Brexit, I am qualified to say it is, because no one could tell me what it is that they're supposed to be angry about. But lots of people were queuing up, certainly in text, to tell me that they were. It was very similar to, why do you want to leave the European? All those laws. What laws? Tumbleweed. So what are these financial sacrifices that you're being compelled to make and these lifestyle changes you're being forced to make because of net zero?
Well, they haven't come in yet. That's the problem.
Yeah. Well, where are they?
At some point
what are
they
you
will.
cross about?
Well, at some point they will. At some point the government...
Honestly, legislate as something coming down the road that you're not going to like, but I can't tell you what it is yet.
I can tell you.
Go on.
Boilers, 2033, you're going to have to change your boiler.
2033.
And it's going to have to be a heat pump instead.
You're going to cast your vote tomorrow based upon the possibility of
I won't, but other people will.
All right, if you say so.
Boilers and cars.
Brexit Mark 2. Mark my words. Brexit 2. ULEZ was supposed to end civilization as we know it. It's been an unqualified success.
If the government are telling you that at some point you need to insulate your home, and by 2020...
I'm down with that sort of thing.
It's going to cost you, I think, around £7,500 per home to insulate it to the standards that the government want you to do. If you're a landlord, that's obviously going to cost you a lot of money. If you're a tenant, that's obviously going to cost somebody a lot of money. Might not be yourself.
Time for PMQs.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On Monday, the Prime Minister's safeguarding minister admitted on the floor of the House that there was a cover-up of the child rape gang scandal. Does the Prime Minister think we should expose this cover-up?
Mr. Speaker, this is obviously a serious issue. I oversaw the first grooming gang prosecution, which was in Rochdale more than a decade ago. There is a contrast here because the Leader of the Opposition, when she was Minister for Children, Women and Equalities, never raised this issue in the House in 3 years. Mr. Speaker, the Shadow Home Secretary held 352 external meetings during 20 months. How many were on this issue? Not one. And they failed, of course, to implement a single recommendation for the independent inquiry into child sex abuse. Mr. Speaker, my position is absolutely clear. Where there's evidence, the police should investigate and there should be appropriate prosecutions. That's route number one. Route number two, we should implement existing recommendations, which did expose what went wrong. They weren't; those recommendations were not implemented by the last government. They're being implemented by this government. We are providing for local inquiries. We're investing more on delivering truth and justice for victims than the party opposite did in 14 long years.
Mr. Speaker, in the last year of Conservative government, we had a gangs task force that found 500 perpetrators, protecting thousands of victims. We launched that inquiry that he's talking about, but more still needs to be done. It's now 4 months since I asked him for a full national inquiry. Instead, he promised 5 local inquiries. There will be 1 in Oldham. Will he now name where the other 4 inquiries will be?
Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, we are providing for local inquiries. This is a serious... Well, they've got so much to say now. Why did they not... Mr. Speaker, why did they not implement a single recommendation in the 14 years they had in office? We're taking forward those. There are recommendations already in place about the change that needs to be taken. They sat on a shelf under the last government. We are acting on them. We are providing for local inquiries, and we're investing more in delivering truth than they ever did.
He cannot name a single place because nothing is happening. He stood there at the dispatch box, promised 5 local inquiries. Nothing is happening. On the last day of term, he had his minister come out to water down the promise to say they would provide funding. That is not good enough. At least 50 towns are affected by rape gangs. Places like Peterborough, Derby, Birmingham, Nottingham, Leicester, Rotherham, Rochdale and Preston. Is he dragging his heels on this because he doesn't want Labour cover-ups exposed?
Mr. Speaker, I spent 5 years prosecuting this case. Mr. Speaker, I was the prosecutor that brought the first case. And when that file was brought to my attention, Mr. Speaker, I noticed that one of the defendants had not been prosecuted previously. Far from covering up, I asked for that file so that I could have a look at it. On the back of that, I then changed the entire approach to prosecutions, which was then lauded by the government. We were doing the right thing and brought those prosecutions. So my record was going after where I thought something had gone wrong and putting it right. She stayed silent throughout their years in government, and so did the entire front bench.
Mr. Speaker, he's not the Director of Public Prosecutions anymore. He is the Prime Minister. People want to know what he is going to do now, not talk about what he did years ago. We are asking for a full national inquiry. Andy Burnham wants a national inquiry. He's not Conservative, he's Labour. Harriet Harman wants one. The member for Rotherham wants one. All of the victims I have met want a full national inquiry. He keeps talking about local inquiries, yet they have not got going. And they haven't got going because local authorities don't want to investigate themselves. Local inquiries cannot force witnesses to appear. Local inquiries can't force people to give evidence under oath. So why won't he have a national inquiry?
Mr. Speaker, we've had a national inquiry. We've had recommendations. There are hundreds of recommendations that have been made in relation to this issue. It is a serious issue. I strongly believe that we should implement the recommendations that have already been made. And that is what we are doing. I strongly believe we should listen to victims, and we've been listening to victims on this side for decades and working with victims for decades in relation to what they want, which is local inquiries, and we've set those local inquiries up.
Mr. Speaker, he says we should listen to victims. The victims want a national inquiry. We haven't had a national inquiry. We had the child sex abuse inquiry, which Conservatives launched. There is still more to be done. It didn't cover this scandal in detail. In Manchester, just last year, authorities were still covering up abuse. The local inquiry chair there has quit. Bradford Council, an area of some of the worst abuses, refuses any inquiry, local or national. Whether it's the streets of Birmingham or the Town Hall of Bradford, it is chaos and cover-ups with Labour councils. When will he show leadership and do the right thing?
The right thing is to implement the recommendations that we've got, which is what they've palpably failed to do in government. The right thing to do is to have the national inquiries that we need, which is what the victims want. The right thing to do is to invest in our criminal justice system so we can bring people to justice. They've absolutely collapsed the criminal justice system. Prosecutions for rape under their watch, they go up or down. They went down to record lows. Investment in prosecuting these cases went down. Their record was abysmal. They should hang their heads in shame.
Mr. Speaker, this is just distraction tactics. He hasn't read the recommendations, because if he had read the recommendations, he would know none of them would tackle this issue. The fact is, if I were standing where he is, we would have had a national inquiry months ago. This issue is personal for me. I have met many of the victims. This is about the protection of children. Nothing else is more important. In the last few days, Mr. Speaker, I've been to Wiltshire, Lincolnshire, Northumberland, Kent. All of them have outstanding children's social care. Do you know why, Mr. Speaker? Because they're all run by Conservatives. That's the difference that Conservative councillors make. Isn't the choice tomorrow between chaos and cover-ups under Labour councils or better services under the Conservatives?
She says they'd have a national inquiry. 14 years. 14 years and they didn't do it. It's so hollow. And yes, tomorrow is the first opportunity the country has to pass their verdict on the leader of the opposition and the party opposite after the general. Have they changed? Have they learned? It's passing verdict on the leader of the opposition. We'll see her next week.
Right, Nadia Winter.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I wish that the leader of the opposition would stop weaponising victims of child sexual abuse. It's damaging victims, and if she cared about child protection, she wouldn't be doing that. It's a disgrace. You're a disgrace. Mr. Speaker, new data shows that in March last year in Hyson Green and Arboretum ward in my constituency, 64% of children were in poverty, the highest proportion in the whole of the East Midlands, and a damning indictment of the previous Conservative government. One of the proudest achievements of the last Labour government was the action it took on child poverty. Can the Prime Minister confirm that this Labour government will do everything in its power to eliminate child poverty, and that its task force has not ruled out abolishing the 2-child benefit limit, the single most cost-effective way to pull children out of poverty?
Minister.
Well, she's absolutely right to raise the disgraceful record of the previous government, which saw an extra 900,000 children in poverty. I'm proud of Labour's record in reducing child poverty, which is what we do in government, and the task force exploring every lever to reduce child poverty.
Leader of the Liberal Democrats, Sir Edward Davey.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And on behalf of my party, can I send our congratulations to Mark Carney and the Liberal Party of Canada on their historic victory. We wish them well as Canada continues to stand up strongly to President Trump's tariffs and threats. Mr. Speaker, Canada has learnt what happens when you do a trade deal with President Trump. He can't be trusted to stick with it. The Prime Minister didn't answer my question last week. He didn't answer my honourable friend, the member for Wokingham, just now. So let me ask again. Will the government give members of this House a vote on the floor of this House on any deal he agrees with President Trump? Yes or no?
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, we are in negotiations with the US in relation to a deal. We will act, obviously, in the national interest to make sure that if there is a deal, it's the right deal for our country. If it is secured, it'll go through the known procedures for this House.
Shred David.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I'm very disappointed in that reply. There was no yes or no response. We do want a vote, and we will keep pressing him and his government on that. But turning to a domestic issue now, Mr. Speaker, my honourable friend, the member for Dorking and Hawley, has taken up the cause of Fiona Lascaris, whose autistic adult son, Christopher, was horrifically exploited and then murdered by a convicted criminal. As ITV News has reported, when Fiona tried to get a mental capacity assessment for her son, she was dismissed. So Christopher never got the support that might have saved his life. We're going to try to change the law so families' concerns over a loved one's mental capacity have to be considered. Will the Prime Minister give his personal backing to that change to stop another tragedy like Christopher's?
Prime Minister.
Well, I thank him for raising that terrible case, and I think the thoughts of the whole House will be with Christopher's family and friends affected by this, and we'll certainly look into what else we can do, and if there's further details that can be given to me of the particular case, I'll make sure that we follow it up.
Jenko.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to start by congratulating Truro City Football Club, who've gone from homelessness to league champions.
Unbelievable. At least that was National League South, not National League North. I'm not sure I could have stomached someone standing up to congratulate Brackley Town on getting But anyway, more on this after that.
James O'Brien on LBC.
18 minutes after 12 is the time. Hey, well, we got that wrong, didn't we? I don't think anyone expected her to go in on that, least of all the man who was knighted largely for his efforts in prosecuting grooming gangs. But to be topical, there were 6 men jailed yesterday. Did you know this? 6 members of a grooming gang, a depraved grooming gang, were jailed yesterday in Liverpool after years between 2016 and 2018 of preying on underage girls. I'm going to read out their names and leave you to wonder why you weren't aware of this story or why Kemi Badenoch made no mention of it at all in a PMQs where she dedicated all 6 questions to the scourge of grooming gangs. Their names are Jack Poulson, Richard Haslam, Daniel Flatters, James Fitzgerald, Corey Barrett and Elliot Turner, all of whom convicted variously of crimes against girls, children under the age of 16, including rape, sexual activity, and other heinous crimes. I'll leave you to wonder why that's not all over your newspapers, or indeed why Kemi Badenoch didn't raise it today. But what she did raise, Natasha, was several locales.
Yeah, and, Nadia Whittome, the MP who you heard just after Kemi Badenoch and Keir Starmer, the Labour MP, took her chance to accuse Kemi Badenoch of exploiting victims. It's a pretty punchy approach to go with. And you know what, actually, I thought this was sort of the Kemi Badenoch that we might see more of when she was elected leader. That, it's incredibly divisive to use this as a way in to saying, well, actually, the local elections are tomorrow. Who do you trust to run your local council?
Yes.
What did she, her quote was something like, chaos and cover-ups under Labour. Like, that's a pretty bold, punchy statement to make from the leader of the opposition. And I'm not sure how well it will go down, but obviously she ticked a lot of local authorities off in her list when she mentioned them all, of which most of them, I think, Kent she talked about a few other names on that list that have got elections coming up in the next 24 hours.
And of course, the 3 years as Women Inequalities Minister and 14 years in power, and nothing done on any of these fronts. While to listen to Nazir Afzal, who was the chief prosecutor in the Northwest, Keir Starmer's track record in this field is pretty close to exemplary. But that doesn't matter online. So a lot of people have accused Kemi Badenoch of being terminally online. We know, for example, that Elon Musk has intervened on the grooming gangs issue, although I doubt he'll have anything to say about the case in Liverpool yesterday that I've just referenced. I'll leave you to wonder why. The idea that this does matter in the terminally online world, where people like Stephen Yaxley-Lennon or Tommy Robinson actively get convicted of frustrating attempts to prosecute these people, but cast themselves as somehow champions of the victims. It plays very well with a certain constituency. If she's chasing their votes, hasn't Farage already beaten her to it? Well,
yeah, exactly. And actually, the Reform Party, I think, are the ones that are fundraising for their own version of an inquiry into grooming gangs.
They're always fundraising for something.
Exactly. But look, yeah, Keir Starmer has a very strong argument, as we've said before.
Does it matter in the terminally online world? It doesn't matter.
I think it does. I think he can say he's got a very, very good track record to point to. What I do think Kemi Badenoch has a point is that I think the government are dragging their feet a little bit on this one. They're not naming those 5 local inquiries that they said that we're going to get specific funding to look into these issues. And the Home Office have, I think, rode back a little bit on this. First, I thought they were going to announce a national inquiry into this. That was rode back. Then it was announced that they were going to. It was not going to be a full inquiry with full statutory powers to force people to attend, and we know that that's not going to be what a lot of victims want to see. And this is a very divisive issue. You speak to some victims who want to see it, some victims don't. Kemi Badenoch, however, is only talking about this because it is an issue that Elon Musk and people on the right wing of the American media talked about 6 months ago. But I don't think that the government have been good enough at getting on the front foot on this narrative and saying this is what we have done and this is what we are doing now for victims of grooming gangs up and down the country, of course, of which there are many. And of course, there were many, many examples where people will say there are cover-ups. The government have a good record on this. Keir Starmer has a good record on it. And I don't think they've quite been quick enough to say what they have been doing.
Yeah, I think that's fair. Glacial governmental movement or glacial Whitehall notwithstanding. I'll read a few messages, as we always do. and picked at random. Badenoch is simply disgusting, says Gary. Kemi is a disgrace, says Chris. She's utterly useless, isn't she, says Matt. Badenoch is showing what a disgusting and disingenuous individual she is, says Dave, using these victims of appalling abuse for political purposes in tomorrow's local election. So cynical and actually depraved. Andrew in Penzance, Kemi Badenoch is a contortionist who managed to put both her feet in her mouth whilst announcing how poor the Tory inquiry into child abuse really was. I disagree with that, Andrew. The inquiry was pretty good. It's the failure to implement Baroness J's suggestions that leads the last government, and to a certain extent the current government, open to criticism. Why does she ask the same question 6 times, says William. The longer this line of questioning goes on, the worse it's getting for Badenoch, writes Isaac. It sounds like grandstanding. She's not doing too badly, says Alice. Her party, writes James, was in charge for checks notes 14 years. Why didn't they launch any of the things that she's now calling here for? Andrew says Starmer looks weak here. He needs to take the reins. Badenoch doesn't seem strong, but he needs to shut her down. He doesn't need to explain himself on every issue. Too much weeds and not enough whacker. And finally, Nassim says, I thought you said she was getting better.
Look, it is an awkward topic for Keir Starmer, and there's no doubt about that. I think he has a very strong argument, but this is an awkward topic for the Labour Party to deal with because of their record in local government, because of what happened over many, many years. And I do think it makes them very uncomfortable because there are so many voters in so many of these areas that the Labour Party do rely on. And turning over the stone to look at what might have happened is an incredibly risky thing for any government to do, let alone this Labour government. And it is something where they do rely so much on so many of these communities' votes. And that is just something which I think a lot of people do not want to do. And you can see that, there is division in the Labour Party on this. People like Paul Ward, the MP for Rochdale, does want to see a full local inquiry.
Andy Burnham.
A very trustworthy guy in the north of England, does want to see it. But some people, very much feel that, like you, that they haven't already done enough to
I'm not sure about that. I don't think they've done enough to implement the consequences of previous inquiries.
So
I'm not opposed to another one. I'm not opposed to a national inquiry.
But the argument is, why bother when you haven't already done it?
Yeah, and also I want to know what it would achieve. So will it identify, in some cases, if people have engaged in a cover-up, and remember there was a case recently of 2 police officers who were actually convicted of the kind of crimes that the grooming gangs have committed. And so the argument that we were told not to investigate because of fears about racism or multiculturalism is going to be true up to a point, but it's not going to be the only reason. These girls were not trusted. They were not believed. They were treated in some cases as the problem rather than the victim. And there's all sorts of stuff that could come out, none of which is going to fit any narrative 100% or completely. The problem is what the result would be. Who is going to get publicly shamed or prosecuted or named? You could spend millions and millions of pounds on an inquiry.
I'm very cynical about public inquiries.
And absolutely nothing happens at the end of it, except Keir Starmer gets to say, we did have one. Are you happy now?
But in a way, he's not reaching for that easy lever. He could.
Yes, well, that's what I'm saying.
All of this could go away if he just said, I'll have a national inquiry. But
there's 20 million quid. Let's have another national inquiry. And then this line of, you heard what my texters say, is closed down immediately for Kemi Badenoch. It makes our... hang on, let me read this from Lisa. She writes, well done to Badenoch, usual LBC bias and racism. So I'm just happy to get that on board for balance reasons.
Like I say, it is an issue and a topic that so many people do feel very, very strongly and passionately about. I don't know if it's worth batting around as a political football at Prime Minister's questions in the way that Kemi Badenoch has done it. I do think it's... look, I've just got a text from a Conservative spokesperson just in now, saying the Home Office promised this rapid review of rape gangs would report in 3 months. They haven't done so. Why is there a delay? And those are important questions which are worth holding the government's feet to the fire on. But, saying that voting Labour is going to be a choice for cover-ups of grooming gang scandals is, I think, not a very nice message to be sending on the local election.
Very popular online, and no doubt Elon Musk will be expressing his approval shortly if he's not a little bit busy.
Isn't he busy sorting out his own company, which is tanking?
Other events. It makes our job a bit harder. The same question 6 times. It's a little bit harder to provide sparkling analysis.
Sometimes I think they really get into the the detail, though. I think when
you're punching a bruise.
Yes, exactly.
On a good day.
Yes. The problem is, I think with Keir Starmer, you weren't really punching a bruise. He was quite comfortable, I think, in answering those questions. Yes, I think this is a very awkward subject for Labour, but Keir Starmer has his own very, very personal success story, and he's able to say, look, What did you do about it? They sat on a shelf. We're doing so much more than they've ever did. And, I spent 5 years prosecuting them. I asked for a review. I changed our entire approach. She stayed silent, and he is absolutely right.
And Dave makes a point here, which hadn't really occurred to me before. He says, sorry, I don't buy any of this. If there was a local cover-up in Labour-controlled areas, surely the Tories would have jumped all over it for political gain. And indeed, if it was happening in the relevant periods, then the government itself would have been Conservative.
Exactly. So it's
just a mess, isn't it? Whichever way you come at it, it's hard not to think that the victims are at the very back of the
which is why I think
concern.
The government at the time, the Conservative government, wasn't interested in uncovering it because it would have happened probably under their watch. And whether they can say, it's a Labour council that did it. They'll go, well, why didn't national government do anything to stop this? So everybody is implicated in this. It's a bit like the post office scandal.
And just to clarify, although it was in Liverpool Crown Court that other grooming gang, 6 members of it were jailed yesterday. The offences themselves took place largely in Bolton. It was a few Liverpudlians a little bit unhappy with my reporting of that. The ringleader was jailed yesterday. There's more than 6 involved. The ringleader was jailed yesterday for 15 years, and there were other defendants as well convicted too. And having read out all their names, I'll leave you to wonder why that's not getting the kind of media coverage that one would expect correctly all grooming gang crimes to receive in the UK media. That's it then, I think, for this week.
That's it.
And he's right. We are going to find out what people think about. I get scared now because I always forget what the rules of purdah are, so I tend not to say anything. But it is. So just to be clear, that there are elections tomorrow. They're largely in areas where the Conservatives are currently in control.
Yeah, and I spoke to someone earlier who thinks that the Tories are going to do that. I think it was a Tory that I spoke to, and they said it's going to be a bloodbath for us. We are going to lose. I think it's something like 900 seats up, and they think they're going to lose 500 of them.
Because it's hard to imagine anyone marching out of their house tomorrow morning with sort of Tory fire in their belly at the moment.
Well, who's ready to forgive the Conservatives after 14 years of government, just after 9 months of seeing Labour in power? They are not ready. The public are not ready to forgive them, and all of those votes are going to go to reform. The Conservatives did really well when these councils were last contested in I think 2021. It's going to be a really poor night for Kemi Badenoch, we expect. But of course, there's other things going on. I think we're going to see a lot of Lib Dems revival in some places
and
too.
The Greens are a coming force, people keep telling me. Yeah. And that makes us, of course, and this is my fault, not yours, is that we should have talked a little bit more about the question from Ed Davey about the trade deal. But we didn't.
Still not promising a vote on a trade deal, which isn't the done thing, but actually, because it's such a controversial policy, maybe it would be a good idea if he did put that to MPs.
It is 12:30. You are listening to James O'Brien on LBC, and Amelia Cox has your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC.
3 minutes after 12, and you are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. As promised, and you will have heard this story correctly, leading our news bulletin, Emma Corr, LBC's correspondent in the southeast of England, joins me now with the tale. I had to do a double take, Emma, when I saw that 300 tonnes of strawberries were not going to be making their way onto the into the punnets of punters this summer.
That's right, James. Well, I've been speaking exclusively to Britain's biggest berry producer. I went to visit Tim Chambers at his farm in Kent last week. And he revealed that to me, a shocking admission, really, that he was forced to leave those hundreds of tons of fresh British strawberries, they're not cheap, we know, to rot in his fields last summer. And that's the equivalent, James, as you said, of millions of punnets simply wasted, all because of border delays. Now, here's what Tim told me.
On this farm now, we walk away from fruit. Last year, in the beginning of August, there were 10 days we walked away from 300 tons of strawberries. Just didn't bother picking them. There was a market, and that would have taken it, but we couldn't get to it in time. Where we used to be able to be certain to deliver to our foreign customers on a particular day or even a particular hour, we can't no longer do that.
And why is this happening, James? Well, a year ago today, a new inspection regime came in as a result of Brexit, meaning plant and some food imports like dairy and meat from Europe are being checked by DEFRA, government inspectors, before entering the UK. The government say in aid of protecting biosecurity. But I've been speaking to industry leaders for a long time about this since the checks came in last year, who have told me now some businesses are seeing delays of up to 20 hours. There's no system in place to prioritise fresh food. And in the case of our fruit farmer, any delay at border is going to cause huge problems. When this produce, like the fruit farmer does, he has a shelf life of around 4 days. 1 day of delays getting berries to Europe. We're talking kind of loss of tens of thousands of pounds here, because some of that fruit, of course, will go off if it's sat in a lorry. And importantly too, James, businesses are trying to absorb huge costs now because they're having to pay government to have these mandatory checks done. I've been speaking to Nigel Jenny, who's the CEO of the Fresh Food Consortium.
An average size business, 200,000-300,000, and for very big businesses, over 1 million. And remember, these are just the fees. Ultimately, we want to continue to provide that great quality of service and that great range of products. But if we can't import them and distribute them effectively, companies will make decisions for their best interest. There will be empty shelves on retailers from time to time.
And Nigel and other businesses, James, are particularly worried about these checks being extended to fruit and vegetables we import from Europe, due to happen this summer. Not to be confused with our fruit farmer who was trying to export to Europe. But Nigel told me that shoppers could face an extra £200 million a year at the checkout, with costs being passed down the chain. And there's a real risk that European exports simply won't want to send their fruit and veg to the UK, European exporters, which we rely heavily on, especially in the winter. But he's saying that some European businesses choosing not to do that, of course, is going to have a real impact. And he knows this because European businesses already experiencing these checks on meat and plant products coming in. They're telling him the combination of delays at the border, the cost and the paperwork for these checks now, it's just too difficult to make it work and keep exporting here from Europe to the UK. And I've spoken to the director of one major flour wholesaler who says he's already subject to the inspection process. He told me actually on Mother's Day, his deliveries were hours late because of border delays, which cost them vital sales. Now, I've put this, James, to the Conservative leader and prominent Brexit backer, Kemi Badenoch. Of course, it was under the Conservative government that these checks were brought in. And she's admitted to us exclusively that the trade deal with the EU may need revisiting in light of what's happening globally with tariffs. Here's what she told me.
I remember as business secretary, we were reducing trade issues that we had with EU. They're not as difficult as they were 5 years ago, but the time to revisit that deal will be this year, next year.
Now, in response to this, James, a spokesperson for DEFRA has said they're working closely with traders to facilitate the movement of goods at the border and are trying to minimise disruption, and are also looking to negotiate a veterinary agreement with the EU to make things easier. And of course, members of the industry I've spoken to, James, are just incredibly worried about this, worried for UK consumers as well. And there's such a real concern for farmers like Tim Chambers, who is essentially just throwing money away at the moment because he can't get into that European market.
I mean, I'd be interested to know what it was that Kemi Badenoch thought she improved when she was business secretary, but that's not the top topic as a consequence of your report, Emma. It's a little bit surreal for those of us who were taking calls from the transport sector and the agricultural sector 5 years ago, warning that this was on the horizon. And then, of course, those warnings became ever more clamorous after David Frost negotiated the deal for which he got ennobled and put in the House of Lords, an appointment that Kemi Badenoch applauded. Just to clarify a couple of things, because the traffic is two-way, and third countries have to abide by European Union rules, regardless of whether they're former members or not. And that leaves the fruit farmer in particular peril. I know that the sector at the time of the Conservative government introducing these measures, the sector, I think Nigel Jenny probably confirmed this to you, they felt that they could have come up with more effective solutions. Is there anything to stop the UK government from just lifting all, or making it a lot easier for European companies to import into the UK?
I think that's exactly what Nigel is saying, James, and exactly what a lot of industry is saying, look, don't wait until it's too late here. Make sure that you make changes now to prevent kind of empty shelves and things like that in the future. I think I went and visited actually a border control point, a private one down in Kent. They offer this inspection service in comparison to the one happening at Sevington, which is the main government inspection centre. They offer this service for a lot cheaper price, but they're having problems getting inspectors from DEFRA to come and see them at that private control point. So you've got continual problems really with trying to get inspectors out to see them. Massive delays at Sevington, but the government don't really seem to be moving on this at the moment, and that's why obviously industry are calling out for help before these checks are introduced on fruit and veg coming from Europe, and we know we rely so heavily on that as well.
I mean, farming industry, and I don't mean this as a criticism, it's a bit like military figures that they always tell us that they need help and that they're being unfairly persecuted. On this occasion, it's clearly true. Is there existential peril here? Some of these people are talking about going out of business entirely or having to recalibrate their commercial interests completely. I suppose I puzzle constantly over why stories like yours don't garner even more attention from, every news outlet in the country should be interested in this, but people can speculate as to why they're not until the cows come home. But these are big employers that are at risk of going under as a direct consequence of economic sanctions that we have imposed upon ourselves as a result of that referendum.
Absolutely. And I think, Tim Chambers, who runs several fruit farms in Kent, he's got 780 acres. I mean, for him, this is damage, but it's not going to close the business down. But there's smaller fruit farmers out there who, if they can't, export an allotted amount of fruit to Europe that they'd always budgeted for, then, of course, it's going to have such a devastating impact on the farm. And I think as well, when I heard from the flour importer who I mentioned, who said to me he's already going through these checks, they're looking at kind of having to absorb costs of £225,000 a year just to pay for the checks. So that's absolutely huge.
It is. Emma Corr, LBC's correspondent in the southeast of England, reporting on a story that should be sending shockwaves through Whitehall, through Downing Street, and possibly even through tomorrow's looming elections, but we are where we are at 12:43, and no, I told you so. No pleasure in this kind of stuff happening, even though some of us were dedicated to detailing how it would, how it could, how it will. Kemi Badenoch claiming that she made things better than they were 5 years ago, when we were still in the European Union, had entirely frictionless and check-free trade in all of the areas that Emma's been reporting on. So, another example of her well-documented ability to never, ever put her foot in her mouth or commit any gaffes ever. Speaking of gaffes, Donald Trump is being interviewed by the ABC journalist Terry Moran yesterday. It was the perfect encapsulation of the things that I have told you I'm struggling with. How do you continue to do this job of journalism when the people that you are talking about or writing about have detached themselves so completely from the truth? To which the answer is, I don't know, but you have to keep trying. And here is the ABC journalist Terry Moran yesterday trying.
He wasn't a member of a gang. And then they looked, and on his knuckles, he had MS-13.
There's a dispute over that.
Wait a minute. He had MS-13 on his knuckles tattooed.
He had some tattoos that are interpreted that way. But let's move on.
Wait a minute. Hey, Terry.
He did not have the letter MS-13.
It says MS-13.
That was photoshopped. So let me
That was photoshopped. Terry, you can't do that. Hey, they're giving you the big break of a lifetime. You're doing the interview. I picked you because, frankly, I never heard of you, but that's okay. I picked you, Terry. But you're not being very nice. He had MS-13 tattooed.
We'll agree to disagree. I want to move on to something else.
Terry, do you want me to show you the picture?
I saw the picture.
And you think it was Photoshopped? Well,
here we go.
Don't Photoshop it. Go look at his hand. He had MS-13.
He did have tattoos that can be interpreted that way. I'm not an expert on them. I want to turn to Ukraine, sir.
Terry,
I want to get to Ukraine.
No. He had MS, as clear as you can be, not interpreted. This is why people no longer believe the news, because
when
it's
he was
fake
photographed
news.
in El Salvador, they aren't there. But let's just go on. They aren't there when he's in El Salvador.
They weren't there, but they're there now, right?
No,
but they're there
in
now.
your picture.
Terry.
Ukraine, sir.
He's got MS-13 on his knuckles.
All right.
Okay?
We'll take a look at that.
You do such a disservice.
We'll take a look at that,
Why don't you
sir.
just say, yes, he does, and, go on to something else?
It's contested.
That's what happens now. It is not enough to allow the president to talk twaddle and then move on to another question. You have to agree with the twaddle. And if you don't agree with the twaddle, he will attack you personally. He will mock you. He will call you not nice. He does not have MS-13 tattooed on his knuckles. Even the photo that he held up on social media yesterday has been shown to include digitally added characters added above his existing tattoo. So he has a leaf, a smiley face, a cross, and a skull. And there are labels describing each symbol, labels beneath the symbol describing them. Now, there could be a case, it's not my area of expertise, there could be a case for arguing, especially given that one of them, the leaf, is a marijuana leaf, that these do denote some form of gang association, but they do not show the characters MS and 13. They have been digitally added. They have been photoshopped. Absolutely incredible. Not just that the president would do that, but also that, as you have just witnessed in a recording of an interview, he doesn't just tell the lie, he demands that the journalist agrees with the lie. I think it's a timely moment to invite Simon Marks back onto the programme to have a little look at some of the other claims that were made during Donald Trump's celebration, if that's the right word, of his first 100 days in office. And we'll do that after this.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 10 minutes to 1. You are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Neil writes, James, people have tattoos of the Rolling Stones. It doesn't mean that they're members of the band. That's from Neil in Berkhamsted. And of course, if the tattoos of the Rolling Stones have been digitally added to a photograph of their hand, then the point becomes doubly true. But that was quite a moment. Unfortunately, it is a moment among many. The effective attempt to coerce a journalist into agreeing with a lie during a television interview isn't even shocking anymore. And I guess thanks to Simon Marks, LBC's Washington correspondent, we are better equipped to be unshocked by this than many other observers. And Simon joins me again now because we now know what he chose to celebrate during his 100-day celebration, described by President Trump at a rally in Michigan that you gave us the heads up on yesterday, Simon, as the most successful first 100 days of any administration in the history of our country, according to many, many people. I can think of one person that might typify it as such, but would he be right?
Look, I mean, he did pretty much what I thought he was going to do, even to the point of quoting from The Economist and saying that he had been described by a newspaper. He didn't identify it as the most consequential president in American history. So impressed was he by that description that he was thinking of subscribing to The Economist, although, of course, he then didn't go on to explain that The Economist also argued that he has spent the last 100 days doing lasting damage to the United States, to its standing, to its values, and to its sense of community. None of that, of course, reflected in this speech. I mean, I think that the speech fired the opening salvos basically in two battles. One was the midterm election campaign, the shameless effort to accuse the Democrats of being radical communists who are supporting illegal immigrants that he characterized without any evidence as terrorists and the most dangerous savages on earth, once again using sort of racist tropes to describe the people that he's deporting en masse from the United States. So a real challenge. At one point he said, why would anybody ever vote for the Democrats? This was the beginning of the midterm election campaign. We're still over a year away from those congressional elections, but he's clearly got them in mind. But it was also yesterday, both the speech and that extraordinary, jaw-dropping, baffling exchange with Terry Moran, a salvo in his desire to provoke a confrontation with the courts. He issued an open invitation last night in the speech to the US Supreme Court to step in and stop lower courts from trying to constrain his power. All of that talk about the MS-13 tattoos, and they were photoshopped, and Terry Moran, you know, the M and the S and the 1 and the 3 was added to the picture by the White House, and Terry Moran is one of the most experienced and widely respected journalists in this city. If you wanted to resolve whether Kilmar Abrego Garcia, the 29-year-old locked up in Trump's El Salvadorian gulag, is indeed a leader of MS-13, you'd put him on trial and you'd allow the courts in the United States to adjudicate it. What Donald Trump has done has denied him all legal process, and he was deported in flagrant violation of a judge's order.
On the question of the Supreme Court, would it be fair to suggest that Trump was expecting them to be more pliable than they're proving to be at the moment?
It's been a mixed bag, James, and, he falsely interprets Supreme Court rulings. So on the issue of Kilmar Abrego Garcia, the Supreme Court, by 9-0, unanimously has said to the American government, you've got to bring him back. You need to facilitate and effectuate his return to the United States. The White House denies that is what the Supreme Court states. And indeed, Donald Trump has now articulated that he's been told by his own advisors that actually the government won in that Supreme Court ruling. And this is one of the reasons why he argues that he's not effectuating and facilitating Mr. Abrego Garcia's return to the United States. So we are now absolutely, completely through the looking glass here. Up is down, black is white, right is left, everything is topsy-turvy. And in that environment, it's not just a challenge to journalists to decide how you try to hold him to account, which is plainly impossible, especially given that he's not surrounded himself with any restraining influences in the White House who can go over to him and say, Mr. President, actually, we lost that case in the Supreme Court.
Do you really believe that?
It's a huge challenge.
Do you really believe there's no one in the White House now that would say that?
No one. Absolutely no one. No one at all.
Because
and that's by
I have
design.
a phrase, Simon. I have a catchphrase on the programme when I say that's not an opinion, that's counting. As if that is the deal closer. You know, if you're actually counting, then all of the other opinions disappear. But he's turned opinion into counting. He is literally claiming the polar opposite. A 9-0 loss is a 9-0 win.
Yes, and I think when we say there's no one who can restrain him, it's actually more accurate to say there's no one who is willing to restrain him or even to attempt. I mean, Senator Marco Rubio is a smart guy. You may disagree with him on policy, but he's a bright fella. Yeah. But he has completely turned turtle in this administration. You know, that iconic picture of him when he was in the Oval Office as Zelensky was being mugged by Trump and Vance, and you could actually see Rubio kind of like sinking into the sofa, hoping that it was just going to swallow him whole. But there is no one in any position of, in any ability to restrain Trump, and that is by design. He said all along he was going to do this, fill the government completely with pliant, sycophantic figures, make America great again loyalists wherever he could. And we heard elsewhere in that speech in Michigan yesterday, just breathtaking claims for which there was no factual basis to support them. And he gets, he makes those in the presence of members of his own cabinet,
who know the truth.
Meeting them later today here, who aren't gonna say boo to a goose.
Petrol, eggs, Doge savings, jobs. It was a long list of claims that are demonstrably untrue. But, of course, in the context of what we've just been discussing, that's quite a double prong, isn't it? The Supreme Court thing, and then the photoshopping, because of course it's all very well being surrounded by sycophants, but for this to work or to continue to work, the media has to be brought to heel as well in an equally brutal way. And that perhaps is what we saw yesterday. So while it may appear unhinged, it's possible, again, that Trump knew exactly what he was doing, and he's now sown seeds of malinformation as opposed to misinformation that the journalist, through no fault of his own, and there was absolutely nothing he could do about it, has become an accomplice to.
Yeah, well, they're setting up parallel structures.
Yes.
So we've now seen the White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt on 2 occasions offer briefings only to supportive representatives of pliant propaganda outlets, polemicists, including, by the way, Winston Marshall, the son of Paul Marshall, the former banjo player with Mumford and Sons, who got to ask a question of Caroline Leavitt about whether there are circumstances under which the United States may take dramatic steps to, as he put it, protect people in the UK who his freedom of speech, he argues, is being threatened by the Keir Starmer government. And the problem in all of this is that it's not just a challenge for journalists and the media. It's a challenge for our own Prime Minister. It's a challenge for Donald Trump's international interlocutors. How do you actually think you can deal with someone who is engaging in disinformation, making things up out of whole cloth that impact policy directly? How can you deal with that person in any kind of reliable, trusted fashion? It's going to be enormously complicated.
And it makes Ed Davies' question in the House of Commons just half an hour or so ago all the more pertinent. Simon Mark's bringing it in bang on time. Thank you. And reminding me, actually, that on the days where you think, I can't ask that question again, those are the days when you need to ask it again and again and again. How do you deal with something so utterly corrupt? A complete denial of reality. If you missed any of today's show, you can listen back on Catch Up on Global Player, where you can also pause and rewind live radio. Gosh. As well as listen to a range of podcasts, including James O'Brien Daily. The best bits of my show in 60 minutes every day. Download it now for free from your app store or head to globalplayer.com. Coming up at 4 on LBC, Tom Sawbridge will be with you, but now it's Sheila Fogarty.
James O'Brien on LBC.